A massive shout out to the Jonin tier member Mr. Leroy 1998 and Jenin tier Leah Rov. Your support means a lot. If you would like your name mentioned in every video, as well as receive special perks and soon having early access to new series, consider becoming a member of this channel by hitting that join button. There's a rumor going around. If you like this video and subscribe, you will be allowed to make one wish on the Dragon Balls. If you become a member, you have 3 wishes on the Super Dragon Balls. Hi guys, this is the next part of What If Naruto Had the Most Powerful Ice Zanpakuto Hyôrinmaru. I hope you enjoy. Jiraiya frowned, looking over the face of the boy in front of him as if expecting him to suddenly grin and shout, "Got you," in a loud voice. But Naruto's face remained serious, almost too serious for the cheerful blonde he had met during the Chunin Exams. In fact, it was almost like looking at Minato again. Jiraiya's frown deepened as he slowly absorbed the information he had been presented with, chewing on his tongue as he tried to make sense of it. Little by little, he reviewed what he had been told and tried to imagine it was reality, losing quite a bit of respect for his old sensei in the process. And yet, he understood the reason and purpose behind it as well. Surely, the massacre of an entire clan by a single man was indeed a tragedy, but to prevent a civil war that would destroy Fire Country and leave it open to its enemies, Jiraiya could understand. Still, he couldn't help but feel there had to have been another way. Then, he berated himself for thinking Sarutobi hadn't tried to take the peaceful way of things. Sarutobi was a man of honor, a man to be respected, but above all, he was a peaceful man. He did not engage in combat unless there was no other alternative. More often than not, there was a distinct lack of alternative. The whole thing still left an ugly and repulsive taste in his mouth, however, and he doubted he could ever accept that there was no other alternative than to wipe out the Uchiha clan. Much like his sensei, Jiraiya was a man who tried to solve things peacefully when he could. He had seen 2 great ninja wars. Going through that, you either came out a peace lover or a violent maniac. Jiraiya sighed. His new apprentice was waiting for his answer. He didn't know what kind of answer he could give, as he still had his doubts about the whole ordeal, but he doubted he would come across any more useful information. "Alright, kid, I'll see what I can do." Naruto nodded respectfully. "Thank you, sensei." Jiraiya shrugged. It was the least he could do for the blonde. After being absent from his godson's life for so long, leaving him to fend for himself against the hateful villagers, helping Naruto achieve his dreams and ambitions was the least he could do. So long as he managed to keep the boy from going dark, nothing else mattered quite so much. Ero Senin. Jiraiya's eyebrow twitched at the nickname, but he responded to it anyway and waited for whatever question was going to be asked. Naruto frowned, as though he was having trouble wording his query. What did the old man mean by the second advent of Uchiha Madara? Jiraiya scratched his chin, digging into his memories to find the answer. To understand what he meant, you'll have to know the story of Konoha's beginning, the story of how the village was built and how the 2 greatest clans in history came to live in one place. Konoha's beginnings. Naruto looked him up and down. "You're not that old, are you?" Jiraiya bopped him on the head, but started his story anyway. More than 80 years ago, the entire world was engulfed in a never-ending state of war. Countries fought to gain power and territory, and ninja were nothing but individual clans hired by those countries. Jiraiya exhaled, closing his eyes as he continued. Among those clans were 2 feared by all as the strongest, the Senju clan and the Uchiha clan. The Uchiha had the Sharingan and an extraordinary amount of chakra. Even among the Uchiha, however, Uchiha Madara was an exceptional individual. Back then, Jiraiya frowned. Life was nothing but one continuous battle. He went so far as to kill his best friend and his own brother just to gain power. As leader of the Uchiha clan and its most powerful member, he used that power to fight the Senju clan time and again. Inevitably, he eventually fought the leader of the Senju clan, Senju Hashirama, the man we now know as the first Hokage. Naruto's eyes widened as Jiraiya paused for dramatic effect. Eventually, as Madara and Hashirama fought time after time, the Uchiha and the Senju became rivals. If one country hired the Senju, their enemies would hire the Uchiha. But then, something unexpected happened. The Senju clan asked the Uchiha clan for a truce, and the Uchiha clan agreed. Jiraiya looked down. According to the Uchiha clan's records, Madara was the only one to voice dissent. It was inevitable, though, that, without support, the only thing he could do was agree. Shortly thereafter, the alliance between the Senju and the Uchiha made a pact with the Fire Country Daimyo, and the first ninja village was formed. Wow, Naruto breathed, but I still don't get what this has to do with the second advent thing. I'm not done yet, Jiraiya glared, then took a deep breath. Things would have been peaceful, but there was a dispute over who would be Hokage. Once Hashirama gained it, though, it soon became clear that the Uchiha were losing their supremacy. Madara was the only one amongst his clan, though, that decided to oppose Hashirama. He left the village. The Toad Sennin's eyes hardened. Bent on revenge, Madara came back and challenged the village, the Nine Tails at his beck and call. Despite the beast's power, Madara was still defeated and, everyone assumed, dead. To ensure that another Madara never came to be, the Nidaime gave the Uchiha the position of military police, supposedly as a sign of trust. It was really just to distance them from the governing of the village. Then the Nine Tails attacked 13 years ago, and the council immediately suspected the Uchiha, thinking a rebellion might be on its way. So, according to the information you've given me, it's safe to assume that the council planted an ambush spy amongst the Uchiha, Itachi. Inevitably, as a result of the council's distrust, the Uchiha must have started planning something, not knowing that Itachi would report it all to the Sandaime. Then, Naruto started, eyes wide. The reason Itachi killed his clan was probably to prevent that plan from occurring. Jiraiya finished for him. Given the second advent thing, I'd have to assume that the thing the Uchiha clan was planning was nothing short of a coup d'état. Nodding, Naruto stood up, flashing the elder man a smile as he turned to leave. Thanks, Arrow Sennin. Jiraiya bit his lip as the blonde left. The smile had been so fake, he had no doubt that, if he touched it, it would shatter. The boy had something to think about and decisions to make. He couldn't interfere with that. It was up to Naruto to make his own decisions, especially now that he was going to be promoted to Chunin. One more successful high-rank mission and he was in. With a sigh and a heavy heart, Jiraiya disappeared in a poof of smoke. Tenten hummed happily as she barely restrained herself from skipping down the bustling street. The sun was shining brightly from a clear blue sky, birds chirping their greetings to the world and singing a song to the heavens. It was the perfect day for Tenten and it was about to get even better. She giggled, slightly surprised she was capable of something so girly, as thoughts of a blonde-haired boy came to the forefront of her mind. At first, the only attraction she had for him was the fact that someone else besides herself had decided to take up a weapon and master it. Swordsmen and weapons masters were in short supply in the ninja world, mostly due to the overabundance of powerful jutsu. In fact, the only other weapon user in Konoha that she could name was Gekko Hayate, and he had disappeared after the preliminaries. The only well-known weapon users in the ninja world were the Kiri no Shinobugatana Nananan Shu, the seven swordsmen of the mist. But Uzumaki Naruto used a katana with skill and finesse that she didn't think a genin could possess, and he made it look easy, too. He treated his weapon reverently, no doubt cleaning the blade whenever he had free time. It was like an extension of himself, of his soul, the way a true swordsman would feel. After all, it was said that a swordsman's soul was in his blade. That had been her initial attraction to him. She felt a sort of kinship with the blonde boy because of his love for his sword and his dedication to perfecting his kenjutsu. Yes, she had spied on one of his training sessions. Just one. To find someone who shared her love for the beautiful steel of a well-polished blade was something she had never even dreamed of. That was just her initial attraction to him, of course. That had provided the spark that would ignite the fire, but several other things had fed the flames since her first meeting with him in the Forest of Death. After all, she wouldn't date just any swordsman or weapons master, she would be incredibly shallow to do so. Another thing that had drawn her to him was his loyalty to his friends and comrades. He was so loyal, in fact, that he had been willing to kill one of his own comrades when it seemed that comrade had used excessive force against one of his own. Guy Sensei had been really disappointed in Neji for involving his feelings in that battle, too. With loyalty like that, she knew, he wouldn't even think of finding another woman once he started dating a girl. That meant that, if she started to date him, she wouldn't have to worry that some other harpy would dig her claws into the blonde. That was one of every girl's fears, that her boyfriend was being disloyal. His selflessness also drew her to him, as selflessness was something rare to see in ninja. He had been tired, no doubt, from his match against Kiba during the preliminaries, and yet, he had used his remaining energy to heal a girl that was, in every sense of the word, a stranger. Such kindness was a big plus in her book. He was strong too, of that there was no doubt. At first, she hadn't thought he could defeat Neji, since there was such a huge gap in their training. Neji had, after all, been training since he could walk. But he had pulled an almost easy victory in the finals. Even a genin fresh from the academy could have seen that the battle was under Naruto's control the entire time. The next thing was his skills. For a genin only months out of the academy, he had unprecedented skill with a sword. He had to, in order to reverse his grip and such to gain an upper hand against his opponent. She knew from experience that he would have very skilled fingers, much as she did. She flushed bright red and started to breath heavily every time she imagined what those fingers could do dancing all over her bare skin. She blushed as her thoughts started to travel into dangerous territory and her clothes suddenly felt too warm for such a hot day. She took a deep breath and imagined Guy in a speedo to calm herself down. A wave of disgust emptied into her stomach at the mental image. She turned the corner and looked towards the ramen shop that Iruka had told her Naruto frequented, only for a block of ice to drop into her belly and her day to start clouding. Tears welled up in her eyes and, with a strangled cry that barely reached a whisper, she turned around and fled as far away as she could. Pinned up against the wall at Ikiraku's was Uzumaki Naruto, and pinning him to the wall, with her lips pressed tightly against his, was Hyuga Hinata, the only girl that Tenten knew would be a rival for Naruto's affection. Ichiraku Tsuki was smiling. Hyuga Hinata, the shyest girl in history, was kissing Naruto. A kunai lay embedded in the branch of a dead tree, its loosened wrappings fluttering in the unforgiving wind. The ground was a barren wasteland, weapons strewn about the bare earth like leaves during autumn. No life could be found, no growth could be glimpsed. Only the dead could be seen, suits of armor made into caskets for the fallen. Corpses littered the ground. This was a battlefield, one that was either freshly made, or centuries old. A small group of survivors stood against the harsh winds, a man amongst them whispering over the howling wind, "It's over, we have nowhere left to go." He kneeled against the earth, clutching to his sword for support. Tears and rain fell down his face. "This is it, our road ends here." A larger, heavier set man lay on the ground, heavy beads roped around his neck. It was a fool's decision, doomed from the start. A third man, this one sporting a tall hat and leaning against a tree, whispered, "This is the end, we must turn back." A woman stood, the only female of their group. "There is a way. Have faith. I know that we will find it." "But, princess," one of her companions spoke up. "You mustn't give up," she said firmly. "Ah ha ha ha." A man dressed in feudal samurai clothes stood atop a ruined building, sneering down at them mockingly. "Princess Gale, this is as far as you go." "Mao," one of the men exclaimed, surprised. Another stood up, shouting angrily, "Don't tell us this storm is your doing." An empty suit of armor stood, swinging a sword at the woman. She blasted it apart with a single strike. "You know," Naruto said to his two teammates, "for such a cliché plot, this is actually a pretty good movie." Sasuke said softly, "Why are we watching this again?" Kakashi-sensei said it had something to do with our next mission, Naruto responded, pumping his fist energetically in mimicry of the movie. On screen, another suit of armor fell to pieces. "Ah," Sakura sighed, "she's so heroic." "We will go to the rainbow," the princess said, then the screen faded into black. Naruto sighed, scratching his head of spiky blonde hair, the metal of his Hittite pressing lightly against his right biceps. Kakashi-sensei is late again. "So, what else is new?" Sasuke asked in his normal, bored tone. Sakura stared up at the sign for the movie they'd just seen. "I wonder why Kakashi-sensei said we'd have to see the movie before our next mission. I mean, that sounds kind of strange, doesn't it?" Naruto shared a glance with Sasuke. "You don't think?" Sasuke shook his head with a frown on his face, for once showing some emotion. "Nah. It couldn't be." The sound of hooves interrupted all conversation as a horse, with Princess Gale riding it, jumped over the wooden fence they'd been waiting for Kakashi at. Landing on the dirt road, it galloped away down the street, its rider seemingly oblivious to the people she'd just surprised. Sasuke was actually looking surprised. "No way," Sakura whispered in awe. "Was that the princess?" The sound of more neighing reached their ears as the wooden gate burst open, several more horsemen flying out of it and after the princess. Startled, Sakura fell back on her rear as the horses nearly trampled her on their way following the woman. She was pulled from their path by Sasuke, who blushed, then let go of her as if he had been burned. After her, one of the horsemen cried. Don't let her escape, another shouted. The words seemed to break whatever tension had silenced Sasuke and Sakura, as they nodded to one another and took off. Naruto took off after them, using Shunpo to fly past his two teammates. They had agreed that, in chase situations such as this, Naruto would rescue and guard the one being chased while Sasuke and Sakura took care of the pursuers. Making a shadow clone, Naruto set it to following his team and the horsemen stealthily. It would inform him of any unusual developments should they occur, and it carried with it a homing tag, something that Jiraiya had taught him to use. Just like it sounded, it resonated with a signal to let him know where it was. Kakashi landed on the open fence, looking around the blank lot in confusion. He blinked. Oro. Sasuke dusted his hands off, looking at his handiwork. All of the men that had been chasing the princess were now tied up securely with no immediate hope of escape. He smirked. Chasing them down and cornering them had been almost too easy. He wished they had been a bit more challenging, so that he might have had some fun with it. Sakura yanked harder on the rope she was using to tie one of the samurai up, tightening the knot that tied his hands behind his back. She smirked, dusting her own hands off in confident satisfaction. That had been rather easy. All it had taken was a transformation and a little deception, along with some welcome help from Sasuke, and they had captured all of the men chasing after the princess. The princess herself was probably far away by now, safe and sound from these villainous fiends trying to subdue her. The real Naruto had probably taken the princess to some safe house, or somewhere else equally as secure, meaning that a clone was watching her and Sasuke from some hidden place. No doubt, it was waiting to see how things progressed just in case the situation took a wrong turn for the worst. Oh dear, Sasuke and Sakura looked up as the voice drifted down. Kakashi stood atop the small shrine in front of them, perched on the support pole like a giant bat. Oh, Sakura said in recognition, Kakashi-sensei. Kakashi sighed, hiding his face behind his right hand in embarrassment. What are you guys doing? Sasuke shrugged nonchalantly, killing time. Kakashi vanished for a second, reappearing in front of his two students. All of the ropes that had tied the men up instantly fell to the ground, sliced cleanly off their bodies. Sasuke's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. What are you doing? Kakashi ignored him and helped the man with glasses up, the only man who hadn't been wearing a helmet when Sasuke and Sakura had caught him. Kakashi scratched the back of his head nervously, chuckling, gee. I'm really sorry about this. Sasuke and Sakura stared at Kakashi, bewildered by his actions as the man dusted his clothes off. Sakura looked as if she wanted to ask a question, but her mouth couldn't seem to form the words. Kakashi looked once at their confused faces, then explained, this is the gentleman who hired us for our mission today. Sakura just stared at him and Sasuke's eyes narrowed, so he elaborated, our mission is to guard Fujika's Yukie, the actress best known for her role as Princess Gale, well, maybe not guard so much as escort. There was a soft pop and Sasuke looked over towards the nearest building, where a small cloud of smoke was dispersing. A soft gust later, any evidence of the smoke was gone and the one who made it had vanished into thin air. A kunai with a seal wrapped around its hilt sat stuck into the wall and Sasuke suddenly wondered how he was going to retrieve it without anyone noticing. He sighed. Sometimes, his blonde teammate was so troublesome. We're shooting the next Princess Gale movie abroad, the assistant director, a young man by the name of Shinji, explained to the two genin and the junin of Team 7, all of who now stood within the studio of the production. It's the first one that we'll be shooting overseas, and I don't think I need to explain to you that our leading lady is a bit of a diva. Even so, that's to be expected of Leaf Ninja. You guys sure are something, the director said, taking a puff on his long pipe. Those men were specifically hired as stuntmen and bodyguards, yet you guys took them out so easily. Who would have thought? Those were some big fellows, too. The director took another pull on his pipe, blowing out a cloud of smoke. Where's your last member, though? I thought there was one more. He's with Yukie-san, Sasuke spoke quietly, arms folded across his chest. Sakura wasn't paying attention to the talk, she was looking at the photos pinned up on the wall next to her. They were mostly pictures of Yukie, ones of her with other people, ones of her with her co-stars, and some of her getting her makeup put on in preparation for her movie role. The one that caught Sakura's eyes, though, was a picture of sheer cliffs, their white walls glistening brightly. Oh, wow, she whispered, awed. Those cliffs are beautiful. That's the Rainbow Glacier. In the land of snow. Sakura spun around at the voice, looking up to see two men, one bald, and one bearded. The bald one was the one that spoke, and she recognized him easily. You played the role of Barikinto, she exclaimed. That's where we're going to shoot the movie's climactic ending, the other man said, smiling at her. You're Hidoro, Sakura said excitedly. You played Shishimaru. The land of snow, Sasuke interrupted. That's a long way to go just to shoot some scene for a movie. Is there a particular reason why you're going to shoot the movie there? Yuki's manager, Sandayu, recommended it, the assistant director said, gesturing to the man wearing glasses that the two genin had tied up. The man bowed to them at the mention of his name. According to him, this rainbow glacier turns 7 different colors during the springtime. It's supposed to be amazing. No, Kakashi said, voice soft and glum, that's just an old legend. The truth is, there isn't a springtime in Yuki no Kuni. What? Sasuke asked skeptically. Not ever, it's winter all year long. Kakashi nodded. Yeah, something like that. Kakashi-san was it? The director asked, turning his shaded eyes on the Junin. Light reflected off his sunglasses. From what I have heard about you, this won't be your first time in the land of snow. That was a long time ago, Kakashi said sadly. They say it's a very poor nation. Sakura jumped up in her chair as another voice joined the conversation, turning around to see a rather handsome man standing behind her, his long hair framing his face. Sasuke's eye twitched. Did this guy's teeth just ping, like Lee's and Guy's? Why you played Sukeakuro? Sakura squealed with a stutter. Sasuke's lip curled as she looked at the man with adoration. Michi-sama, you're so great. I heard that they suffered an economic collapse because their feudal lord overindulged in karakuri puppets, Hidoro said, sharing what he knew about the story. Actually, the story is, their former lord had a thing for gadgets, Mitch continued. They say he squandered all of the clan's gold on mountains of useless doodads and gizmos and stuff like that. Really? Well, I just hope they have central heating, Hidoro said, a cup of coffee in his hand. He pretended to shiver. I'm not all that cut out for the cold. Maybe you should run for the hills, too, just like Yukie, the bald man said, prodding his coworker teasingly. Ah, hey, come on, you guys. That's not even funny, Shinji whined. All 3 actors just chuckled at his distress. So, does that mean, Yukie-san, I mean, she's not always like this, is she? Sakura asked. The 3 men fell silent, sharing a look with one another, a frown on each of their faces. Kind of. Yeah, Michi said sadly. Poor Yukie, she's not the kind of person to understand such things like dreams or aspirations. But she's never neglected her work, the director insisted firmly. When the camera's rolling, she plays her part magnificently, never missing a line. She's the best actress I've ever met, and I don't mind telling you that I've met quite a few. Yeah, Sasuke interrupted, but where is she now? What good does all that do when she's not here at this moment, or when you don't even know where she is? Naruto had to go find her for you. It's true, Shinji admitted, his tone downtrodden, like a kicked puppy, we don't really know where she is right now. It's just that, ever since she found out we're going to the land of snow, she's been trying her hardest to get away from us. It's like she doesn't want to go to there. I can understand why she doesn't want to go, Kakashi said, hands tucked into his pockets. It's not my place to tell you why, but Yukie has some very bad memories of the land of snow. If I were her, I probably wouldn't want to go either. Yukie looked at her reflection in the clear glass of her cup, then downed its contents in one gulp. She looked in it again, and a happy, smiling little girl looked back at her with wide, gleeful eyes and a bright smile. Herself, years ago, when the world had only been as big as the castle she lived in. The light above her head flickered and the image was replaced by her reflection once again, her eyes dull and her expression somber. Bartender, she called, a slight slur to her words. Another of the same. She stared once more into the shot glass, watching as her sullen appearance disappeared into an ocean of amber as the bartender poured more of her precious sake into the tiny cup. He moved away, probably to tend to another customer, and she took a small sip. This time, when she set the cup down, its contents sloshing slightly, the courageous Princess Gale stared back at her with determination in her gaze. Gulping the rest of the cup's contents, she jerked her hand to the side, sending the cup into the wall halfway across the bar. It shattered upon contact, each of its tiny glass pieces mocking her with a determined stare or a happy smile. She held her head in her arms, trying to erase the two images from her mind, even though they seemed burned forever onto her retinas. Vaguely, as if it were on the very edge of her senses, like a ghost, she heard someone sit down next to her. She didn't even bother to lift her head from her arms, because she didn't really care who was sitting there anyway. They would leave, eventually, just like everyone else. You know, Yukie-san, the person said, his voice awfully young. Yukie didn't budge even a centimeter. You really should be getting back by now. I'm sure your friends are worried about where you are right now. Yukie glanced at him, then turned back around, mumbling, I'm not going to Snow Country. Ah, she could somehow tell that he was nodding in understanding, problems with the past. And you don't want to face them. But, if you don't face them, then you can never truly move on, which is why you're sitting here diving into a bottle of alcohol. She glanced at him again as she heard the quiet jingle of jewelry, slightly surprised to see the Shodai Hokage's necklace hanging in front of his collarbone. Do you know how I got this? She shook her head, something she immediately wished she hadn't done, and he continued, I won this in a bed with Tsunade Hime of the Sannin. The thing is, if I hadn't helped her face her past, she wouldn't be Hokage right now. So now I'm going to do the same for you, whether you like it or not. Yukie laughed mirthlessly, her voice hollow. What would you know about hardship? I bet the worst thing that has ever happened to you was a stubbed toe. She gasped as haunted blue eyes rose to meet hers. I've been alone all my life, wondering if my parents abandoned me or if they were just dead. I spent 12 years wondering and 6 years living on my own with no one else to rely on. Every time I go shopping for food, I get nothing but cold glares as I walk down the street. I had to watch a very good friend die and bear witness to the murder of the man I called grandfather. Those blue eyes sharpened. I think I know a thing or two about hardship. Yukie-sama, a voice cried. Sandayu rushed up to her stool, standing next to her anxiously. Yukie-sama, the boat to Yuki no Kuni is departing soon. We must hurry. No, Yukie said firmly. I'm not going. The Sky Princess is stepping down. Don't say that, Sandayu insisted. It's fine, Yukie said lazily. Between sequels, the star is often switched. Just like the director, the cameraman, Only you can play the Sky Princess, Yukie-sama. Sandayu said seriously. Yukie snorted, taking another sip of her sake. Don't be ridiculous. A voice sighed, it can't be helped. Huh, Yukie turned around, only to catch sight of a vibrant red eye with 3 black tomo swirling inside its depths. Instantly, the world around Yukie started to spin in circles around and around. Then, with drooping eyes, she fell from her chair, unconscious. Kakashi caught her effortlessly, picking her up bridal style. Sandayu sighed in relief. They had found her, at least. It was a start. Was the hexagon crystal in her possession? A commanding voice asked, the owner's finger drumming impatiently on his throne of a chair. I knew it, the light-haired ninja kneeling before the man said. I knew that the actress called Fujika's Yukie was actually Kazuhana Koyuki. Those 10 years of vigorous searching are finally paying off, a pink-haired kunoichi said. Hey, a large, heavy-set shinobi chuckled. This is all too easy. It'll be even easier if she's alone defenseless. However, the first, light-haired ninja said, I believe that she is under the protection of not one, but 2 a rank ninja, Copy Nin Hataki Kakashi and Ryujin Namikaze Naruto. The Hataki Kakashi, the heavy-set one asked. He chuckled, turning to his light-haired comrade. Sounds like this confrontation was decided by fate. The runt is the one that concerns me, not the copy ninja, the man in charge said. As young as he is, he was given the name Konoha no Ryujin. And by one of the legendary Sannin, no less. He must be very powerful. How much was the bounty on him, again? I believe it was a mere 5,000 ryu less than Kakashi's, the light-haired ninja commented. It certainly sounds like Orochimaru wants this kid dead. Indeed, the boss drawled. Do you believe the rumors are true? That he can summon a dragon as tall as the sky? Or that one swing of his sword can fell 100 foes? Though they are based on facts, those rumors are probably greatly exaggerated, the pink-haired kunoichi said. She smirked. I've heard that he's as fast as the yellow flash. Like father, like son, eh? The heavy one chuckled. This certainly sounds like fun. Let's collect on this punk's bounty before any of those Iowa bastards get the chance. NNNG, Yukie covered her eyes with her forearm, trying to block out the sun streaming in the window to her left. "Are you awake, Yukie-sama?" a familiar voice asked from her side. "Sandayu, get me some water. I feel dizzy," she said, rubbing her eyes. "I feel like I'm swaying, am I imagining it?" "No," was the slightly hesitant reply from Sandayu. "It's not your imagination." Yukie jumped from her bed in shock and flew to the first door she could find, flinging it wide open. A wooden deck, sails, and the open sea greeted her eyes. They were on a boat, presumably the very boat Yukie hadn't wanted to travel on. As the shock slowly settled down, morphing into anger, her eyes narrowed furiously. "What the hell is this?" 2 hours later found Yukie dressed and sitting down in front of her makeup specialists as they set up her eyeliner and lipstick. Nearby, the stage crew was setting up for the film, using fake pieces of lumber to give the impression of a battle on the boat. "I don't like her," Naruto commented out of the blue. "She broods too much." "Don't say that, Naruto-kun," Kakashi told him. "She's the subject of our mission, after all. And it is an A-rank mission." Naruto sighed. "I know. This mission shouldn't be too difficult," Sasuke said, looking out at the ocean. "We are, after all, only escorting an actress." "Don't be too sure," Kakashi warned. "There are plenty of famous people who are always being targeted by someone or other. Assume there will be enemies and don't get caught off guard." A big light lit up, focused on the makeshift stage aboard the boat. "Lights okay, microphone okay, camera okay. Start from the test," the director shouted into his megaphone. "Get in the act." Scene 23 Cut 6, Take 1, the assistant director said. Action. Team 7 watched, mostly in amazement, as Yukie became a whole different person in front of the camera. She grasped onto the injured-looking Hydro, distress in her tone. "Hold on, Shishimaru." "It's useless, princess," Hydro gasped out, his voice weak. "What are you saying?" she asked back. "We found our courage because of you, princess," he said weakly, gasping for air. "I wanted to see the other side of the rainbow with you." With a soft thud, his head hit the wooden floor and he stopped moving, seemingly dead. "Shishimaru," Yukie called out. There was a pause, then Yukie exhaled impatiently. She waved her hand. "Hang on." Several cries of disappointment met her words. "Sandayu." Yukie ignored their anger, waving her manager over. "I need more tears." Amidst indignant protests, Sandayu walked over and pulled out a bottle, squeezing a few droplets of its contents into Yuki's eyes. "Okay," Yukie shouted as Sandayu moved away. "Let's do it again, quickly." Scene 23, Cut 6, 2. Action. Shishimaru. Director. Shinji pointed something out to the director. "Serious problem." A large iceberg floated stoically in the ocean in front of the ship Team 7, Yukie, and her entourage were on. Despite its motionless form, it seemed to be mocking them, telling them that all their hard work was for nothing. "This happened in the morning," Shinji explained. "As you can see, the route is covered. What should we do?" The director had an epiphany, his eyes widening slightly. "Come here." "The movie is ruined," Shinji sulked, discouraged. "You idiot," the director shouted at him, whacking him over the head with his bullhorn. "Look, this is the perfect location. If you don't film here, where are you going to film?" Shinji was confused to say the least. The movie gods got angry, the director offered for an explanation. Everyone looked at him like he was crazy. Turning, he addressed the group. "Get ready for some climbing." An hour later, the entire crew had unloaded the necessary materials and was standing on the giant block of ice and snow. Yukie sat in front of a portable stove with Team 7, warming herself in front of it as she yawned. "We're going to Hanbani, Stunt B1, Scene 36, Cut 22. Action. Ha, ha, ha. You came here by mistake, Sky Princess," the old man playing Mao cackled from his hill, waving his staff about madly. "Stay back, princess." Sukeakuro stepped forward, grasping the hilt of his sword. "I'll fight him." Mao seemed smug. "Brats or not, you're no match for me." He pulled his hand back, as if to launch some attack, when an explosion from the cliff behind him nearly knocked him off his feet. No longer acting, the old man turned to where it had occurred, staring at it in alarm. What was that? Before anyone knew what was happening, Kakashi stood in front of Yukie, which confused the actors quite a bit. "Hey," Sukeakuro shouted indignantly, "what do you think you're doing?" Kakashi, Yukie murmured, "What?" Kakashi paid their queries no notice. "Everyone, get back." As the smoke cleared, a man could be seen standing there, his ears obscured by some sort of hat. He wore a smirk and a white bodysuit, a disc glowing lightly from his shoulder. "Welcome to the land of snow." Kakashi's eye widened. "You are. I welcome you, Koyuki," a pink-haired kunoichi said, standing on an outcropping. "Did you bring the hexagon crystal?" Alarmed, Kakashi looked back at Yukie. "Koyuki. Hey, ha, ha." A third, much larger shinobi appeared. As expected of the great Hatake Kakashi. "We meet again." Kakashi nearly growled. "Sakura-san, Sasuke-kun, Naruto-kun." The three genin snapped to attention at being addressed. "You guys guard Yukie, everyone. Return to the ship." Fubuki, Mizore, the light-haired ninja addressed his comrades. "Let's get Princess Yukie." In a flash, Fubuki and Mizore had left their perches while Kakashi raced towards the last of the three snow ninja. He leapt up the side of the cliff, jumping from one foothold to the next until he stood in front of the apparent leader of the three snow ninja. He glared at his opponent, a grudge if he'd ever had one. "It's been a long time, Kakashi," the light-haired shinobi stated nonchalantly. "This time, you won't escape from me." "Ruda Narer," was all Kakashi said, his visible eye narrowed. In an instant, they dashed towards each other, Kakashi blocking Ruda's knife hand chop with his left arm. Leaning backwards, he dodged out of the way of a kick that would have sent him flying. Pushing away from one another, they landed on separate outcroppings, then catapulted off of the ground and at each other again. They clashed a second time, pushing against one another before landing on separate sides of the narrow canyon. To the cast and crew still loading up onto the ship, it looked like a scene right out of some movie or other. Naruto set his sights on the heavy-set man, who suddenly pulled a snowboard out of nowhere and used it to move down the icy slope faster. Sasuke threw one of his windmill shuriken, watching in shock as it shattered on Mizore's body armor. "What? Hyoten. Sabama Fubuki." Sasuke leapt to the side of the rain of frozen sparrows, flashing through hand seals as he turned to the pink-haired Fubuki. He stopped on Tiger, taking in a deep breath. "Kaden, Gukaku no Jutsu." A great ball of fire raced forth, melting the remaining ice birds. Planting his feet firmly, Sasuke heard Sakura yell out for everyone to return to the ship. He scowled, preparing for one of the most difficult battles of his life. "Hyoten." Fubuki kneeled, pressing her fingers to the iceberg. "Hyôro no Jutsu." Sasuke jumped back as pillars of frozen mass rose up and towards him, going through more hand seals. He took a deep breath, blowing out another fireball. Fubuki smirked as a column of ice rose up, turning to steam as the fire collided with it. Mizore jumped off of his snowboard, leaping towards Naruto with his ironclad fist pulled back for a punch. Channeling chakra to his arm, Naruto reached up and grabbed the fist effortlessly, balling his other hand up before unleashing it into the man's side. To his shock, Mizore didn't react in the slightest to having a chakra-enhanced punch slammed into his ribs. Mizore hit him with his other fist, knocking Naruto into one of the ice pillars Fubuki had summoned. Kakashi turned around at the sound of Naruto crashing into the pillar, going through seals as a column of swirling water rose out of the ocean. Suryuden no Jutsu. Mizore jumped out of the way as a dragon of water crashed into the spot he'd previously been occupying. "Risk your life and keep shooting," the director shouted from the bottom of the slope. "Take pride in our work." Naruto stood up, back to back with Kakashi. "Sensei, what's going on? What's with that armor?" "It's Yuki no Kuni's armor, specially made and tailored for each individual ninja," Kakashi said seriously. "It's chakra armor. They use it to power up." "You remember?" Ruda asked nonchalantly, seemingly impressed. "This armor expands my internal chakra and strengthens my techniques. It creates a wall of chakra around the body, so yours and others' chakra are weaker. This causes chakra anti-phase, so ninjutsu and genjutsu are useless." "That armor doesn't make you invincible," Kakashi said coldly. Simultaneously, both Ruda and Kakashi swept through hand seals. Naruto pulled his sword free, rearing back for a swing. "Hyoten. Haryu Muko. Suryuden. Sôten ni zase. Hyôrinmaru." A dragon of snow leapt from the mountains, colliding with a dragon of water that flew from the ocean. A third dragon came from the land, made of icy cold water compressed into a detailed, corporeal form. Ruda dodged to the left, clearing the path of the dragon but for the thin lock of hair that hung in front of his eyes. To his shock, after the dragon had sunk into the ocean, that lock of hair was encased in thick ice. "I see," he said once he regained his composure, "so that's why they call you the Dragon God. And here I thought Orochimaru was exaggerating your abilities." "What?" Kakashi and Naruto demanded simultaneously. "My," Ruda drawled, pulling a booklet from his armor, "you didn't know? He's put quite an impressive bounty on your head." The booklet fluttered down to the ground in front of Kakashi, open to a page with his blonde-haired student's picture on it. It read, "Namikaze Naruto. Rank a threat. Nami, K's," Kakashi whispered in shock. Mizore, once more on his snowboard, slid down the mountain slope towards Yukie, who was kneeling on the ground reliving the night her uncle had revolted, killing her father in the process. Memories of the flames licked at the air in front of her. Mizore lifted his hand, taking advantage of her distraction, and ropes shot out, wrapping around Yukie. Sakura quickly cut them off with a kunai, courageously facing towards a superior enemy. "You little bitch," Mizore yelled angrily, raising his fist. He didn't get any farther, as Naruto's fist collided with his face. He stood again, growling angrily, "You little brat." He punched, first with his ironclad hand, then with his normal hand. Naruto grabbed them both and immediately started an inverted game of tug-o-war, pushing against the behemoth in front of him. Mizore scowled as he looked into Naruto's vibrant blue eyes. Fubuki smirked as one of her ice pillars finally caught up to Sasuke, engulfing him in the frozen mass. Her smirk disappeared, however, when Sasuke was replaced with a backpack with an explosive note on it. The explosion shattered the ice pillar, making her unprepared for the wires that shot forth and tied her to another pillar. As fire rushed along the wires, a set of wings opened up from the metal disc on her back, setting her free. She took to the air at the last second. "What are you doing?" Naruto turned his head slightly, glaring at Yukie as she trembled. "Hurry up and go." "No," she whispered shakily, wrapping her arms around herself. "Princess, let's hurry and return." Sandayu insisted. "Hurry up if you value your life. You will die for sure if you stay." "No," Yukie shouted, clutching her head. "I won't leave Snow Country." Naruto glared, "You're being very self." He was cut off as Mizore took advantage of his distraction and tossed him to the side. Naruto collided with the ground and disappeared with a pop in a small cloud of smoke. Free of the encumbering boy, Mizore aimed his arm and his iron hand shot forth, connected to him by a wire. Sakura dove in front of it and he scowled, jerking his arm and sending her into the snow. She was unconscious. Yukie chose that moment to collapse. "Princess!" Sandayu cried. Kakashi turned to help but Ruda wouldn't allow it. He yelled, "Your fight is with me. Hyoten. Itsukaku Hakuge, Section Beluga." A creature resembling a whale rose from the ice, blocking Kakashi's path. He stopped, silent for a few seconds. Then, he said, "I see. That's a powerful jutsu." He pulled up his Hitai-8, revealing the Sharingan, "Then I will fight you. Naruto, get everyone to safety." "No," Naruto shouted, eyes shining with anger and determination. A white, visible aura lit up around his form and the temperature in the air seemed to take a nosedive. "I will handle this guy." His tone brooked no argument. "Kakashi-sensei, get everyone onto the boat." Hesitating only slightly, Kakashi leapt away to help everyone escape. Ruda laughed loudly, a smirk on his lips. "You handle me. Go back to your little sandbox, brat." Naruto turned his frigid glare onto Ruda. "I can see that you're not going to back down. You leave me no other alternative." "What's this?" Ruda teased cockily, trying to act tough, eh? Naruto's next word sent chills down the snow ninja's spine. "Bankai." Wings of ice spread outward, maneuvering with amazing ease considering their composition. They were attached to the Konoha Genin's back, covering his shoulders with a protective layer. Beneath the wings was a large tail of ice that flicked back and forth, as if it belonged on the boy. A thick layer of jagged ice covered the blonde's right arm, encasing his fist and the hilt of his sword in a dragon's head. His feet were covered in ice as well, forming what appeared to be a dragon's paws. His left arm, from elbow to wrist, was also covered in ice, a claw-like paw attached to the wrist. The hilt guard on the sword appeared to be the only thing that had changed about the katana, morphing into an 8-point star. 4 ice flowers, each with 4 petals, hovered around the blonde's form. Naruto's eyes were frigid blue, Daiguren Hyôrinmaru. Great Crimson Lotus Ice Ring. Naruto lifted his sword slowly, his voice calm and unwavering. Normally, I would have to conjure up my own ice for this purpose, using up a fair chunk of energy in the process. But pillars of ice rose up around Ruta, the space between them just wide enough to allow escape should he try to squeeze his way out. Naruto continued, you chose to fight an ice user, one with far deadlier techniques than yours, on an area where he had the advantage. You actually provided me with the material I needed for this technique. Foolish. He twisted his sword sideways, until the flat of the blade was parallel to the ground. The pillars rushed in, trapping Ruta in a prison of ice, Senenhyro. 1,000-year ice prison. Naruto looked up, watching as Ruta fled using a set of mechanical wings. Fubuki and Mizore followed his lead, disappearing into the sky. As soon as they vanished, he looked back down at the iceberg beneath his floating feet. Time to take care of this problem. He swung down into the glacier, watching as a thin ripple waved across it in either direction. Invisible from the surface, a thin sheet of ice split the glacier in half, causing it to collapse in different directions. As the boat sailed away, the iceberg split into pieces, falling into the sea. Naruto hovered a few feet from the boat's edge, watching as the giant berg sank into the water. He was just barely within the camera's scope, his wings hiding his face. Cut. The director yelled. Sandayu-san, you knew it, didn't you? Kakashi asked. Yes, was the quiet reply. You know what would happen if the princess returns to Snow Country. It was my only way to bring the princess back here. I couldn't do anything else. So Yukie is a real princess? Naruto asked the question he knew his teammates wanted to but wouldn't. Yes, Kakashi answered, Fujika's Yukie is using a fake name. Her real name is Kazuhana Koyuki, the heiress to the Snow Country throne. She might not remember, now, Sandayu said, but when she was young, I was by her side. I served her father, Kazuhana Saozutsu. The kingdom was small but peaceful. Saozutsu-sama loved the princess very much. Every day, he spent time with her. However, 10 years ago, Dotu, Saozutsu-sama's little brother, hired ninja and revolted. He took over the kingdom. When I found her, she was already an actress. It would have been better if I had died that day, Yukie said, standing in the door. Please don't say such things, Sandayu said. You're alive, and that brings us great hope. I haven't cried since that day, she said coldly. My body may be alive, but my heart died a long time ago. Princess Yukie, Sandayu bowed, kneeling on the floor. You must overthrow Dotu and become the new queen. I don't want to, but the people of Snow Country. Sandayu protested. It's none of my business, Yukie insisted coldly. You should know when to give up. No matter what you do, you can never beat Dotu. If you truly believe that, then you never will, Naruto told her, his voice icy. If you have nothing to die for, then you're not truly alive. To accomplish anything, you must have courage and you must persevere. Giving up is never an option. To be able to live life as you wish, you must be willing to die for a cause. Otherwise, death is a kinder fate. People dream because they never give up. You can see your future when you find your dream, the director said airily. Not too bad. That's the perfect theme for the final chapter of The Sky Princess. Why you want to, Shinji, the assistant director, stuttered, continue the movie? Didn't I mention it? The director, Anishi, asked. We're going to make this into a movie. Imagine it, a real princess acting in it. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Really? Shinji grinned. Then the topic would be a big one. Without any fuss, people will accept it, the director said, nodding. Wait, Yukie started to protest. You've no other choice, now, Kakashi told her. Dotu knows that you're alive, so you've no place to hide. Stop talking such nonsense, Yukie shouted. Reality and movies are different things. There's not a happy ending in reality. You can overcome that, Anishi insisted firmly. We should probably go home for some backup, but, Kakashi commented. We've got 2 Sharingan users, 2 swordsmen, and 2 ranked ninja. The members of Team 7 should be enough for this mission, Sasuke said. Then it's decided. We'll continue, Anishi said. Let's make a happy ending. Shinji shouted excitedly. Naruto stared into the cavern, the harsh wind whipping around his skin and through his hair. To most, the cold air and even colder temperatures would be a reason to wear a heavy coat and snow boots, but Naruto needed neither. He was an ice elemental. To him, This cold wind was like a summer breeze. All our crew gathered at the other side of this cave, Sandayu said. Once we're finished with our work here, we'll join them. Tell me, Sandayu-san, Naruto said quietly, never turning from the cave, do you truly think? Yes, Sandayu replied firmly. I will believe in Yukie-sama, even if she doesn't believe in herself. Less than an hour later, the entire group was inside one of the vehicles, which was carrying them through the cavern. Naruto was sipping some tea, a habit that he'd picked up after a month of eating lunch with Hinata. It was quite a soothing habit, he had to admit, but he doubted anyone could imagine him as a tea drinker. This place used to have a railway, Sandayu commented. It extended all the way into Sarara, but the tracks are frozen beneath the ice. Railway? Naruto asked curiously. Yes, Sandayu nodded. It allowed us to travel by train all over the land of snow. We could leave one end of the country in the morning and arrive at the other end by nightfall. Kakashi-sensei, why don't we have a railway and train for Konoha? Naruto asked. Because we don't need it, Kakashi answered simply. Most of the people who leave the village are ninja fast enough to outrun a train, so the railway and tracks would be pointless. Besides, it would cost too much to hack away a path through the trees. Oh, Naruto said lamely. They stopped outside near a cliff, everyone unloading their materials. The director stepped out of his trailer, shouting, all right. Let's begin. Director. Big problem, Shinji cried, panic in his voice. It's Yukie, she's run away again. With a sigh, Team 7 leapt off of the cliff in order to search for her. The snow crunched quietly beneath their feet as Kakashi gave his orders, everyone split up to find her. When you do find her, contact the rest of us via radio. Go. Roger. The three genin called out in unison. Naruto stopped on a rock as his teammates continued forward, then made an hand seal. 20 Kage Bunshin appeared in a poof of smoke, each one saluting him. He sighed, split up and searched the area. When you find her, activate the homing beacon on your kunai and pursue. Do not take action. Hi, chorused the group. In a blur, all of them took off in separate directions. The real Naruto squared his expression, then leapt into the forest. Naruto landed in the tree branch next to his clone, nodding to it with approval. With a hand seal, all of the clones dispelled themselves and their knowledge flooded his brain. He grimaced, the only sign that the clone's memories had caused him any sort of discomfort. He was still getting used to the sensation of accumulated knowledge. Naruto landed on the snow with barely a sound, walking slowly towards Yuki's prone form. He kneeled next to her, whispering quietly into her ear, this is the last time you get to run away. Everyone is waiting for you. Picking her up, he hoisted her onto his back, her arms hanging limply over his shoulders as he carried her back to the others in the movie caravan. After a few minutes of walking, they came upon the cavern they had traveled through before and he continued ceaselessly, trudging through it dutifully. Finally, after being silent for the entire journey, she spoke, why is it that you always find me? Because it's my mission, he said firmly. It doesn't matter to me if you hate it or hate me for it. Or even run away, I know how you feel, so I'll do my best to make sure you don't have to feel this way. Fine, she said after a pause. Let's go back, all I can do is act for the camera. I can't do anything else. Naruto sighed, you know, you remind me of this little boy I met a while back. He cried all the time as soon as he thought no one was watching and he scorned everyone who tried to free his country from an evil man, telling them it was hopeless and that they would just die. He even yelled at me, calling me stupid for thinking I could defeat Gedo. Well, one day, when he was about to lose his most precious person, he decided to go against his own words and fought Gedo, if indirectly. He was willing to give up his life, and he would have, if not for some timely intervening on my part. After that, he smiled up at me, and thanked me for everything I'd done. So, Yukie mumbled, how does this apply to me? Because, Yukie-san, Naruto said firmly, you're just like Inari was before he met me. There was a sudden sound and Naruto stopped, stiffening in preparation. A light lit up the cavern, and a rumbling sound met his ears. Cursing at how inopportune it was, he turned and disappeared in a flash, Yukie screaming as she clung to his neck. Still, the train was fast and ever on their tails, slowly getting nearer. A whistle sounded as the roaring locomotive steadily caught up with the blonde boy, breathing down his neck with steam and smoke. Naruto's legs burned as he struggled to keep ahead of the beastly machine. using Shunpo every couple of seconds to gain a lead away from the thing. Still, it came, drawing ever nearer despite his efforts. As the train got closer, its whistle blowing almost right into the blonde's ears, Naruto leapt through the tunnel opening into the side, crashing into the snow bank. Dislodged from Naruto, Yukie fell face first into the snow. The train thundered on past, several meters from their location. It screeched to a halt with little effort, standing ominously in front of the tall hill that would be the only means of escape. It's been a long time, Koyuki. Yukie looked up to the man who had spoken. He stood on top of the train, which had stopped not long after it had exited the cave, its entire body snaked over the wood and steel tracks. Kazuhana Dotu, Yukie said breathlessly. It's been 12 years, Dotu said oily. Come closer. Let me get a better look at your face. Naruto glared at the man, standing in between him and Yukie. He reached up, grasping his sword tightly as a white aura lit up around his figure. Dotu arched an eyebrow. There was a large rumbling, and everyone turned their eyes towards the cliff, where several logs clambered down the slope and crashed into the train. The metal behemoth threatened to tilt on its side, wobbling dangerous, before it settled down again. Sandayu and several other men dressed in armor stood at the top of the hill, assembled as an army. Everyone, come and see our Princess Koyuki, Sandayu cried to his comrades. If we fight alongside her, we can win this war. Cheers of valor rose to greet his proclamation, roaring into the bleak sky. Sandayu drew his katana. Kazuhana Dotu, you know how long we have awaited this day. Today we will end all the hatred which has acclimated over the ages and we will avenge our late king, Kazuhana Saozutsu-sama. Naruto glanced to the right and saw the director and his camera crew filming under the cover of a tarp. So, Dotu drawled, the likes of you are still alive. Sorry, Ruda apologized, we'll take care of them. No, Dotu said, a dark grin on his face, let's give them a taste of helplessness. Sandayu and his men charged forward as Dotu pressed a button, prompting several compartments to open up on the train's side. The men slowed their descent only slightly, then started screaming as hundreds of kunai launched from the train without any specific target. No, Naruto cried, watching as countless warriors fell to the ground, dead or dying. A windmill shuriken protected the gray-haired man who was the catalyst for it all, blocking the kunai from getting an instant kill. Sandayu, the only one left standing and injured beyond help, collapsed backwards as Sasuke leapt onto the scene. Pulling out a kunai, he threw it at one of the barrels controlling the guns, an explosive tag dangling from its end. It exploded, destroying that particular turret. In that instance, the entirety of the guns stopped firing. From up on the cliff, Sakura tossed a wad of explosive notes, which then exploded and caused an avalanche to form. It thundered down the mountain, then rolled over and buried a portion of the train. The intact part of the train detached from its hindquarters and sped on down the tracks for a tactical retreat. Sasuke made to follow, but Kakashi jumped down and stopped him. Wait, Sasuke. Don't go after them. Princess, Sandayu called weakly. Yukie kneeled beside him, sincerely sorry, to get you tangled up in this. We gathered, because of the princess, and we never gave up. Sandayu, Yukie protested. Don't, Sandayu interrupted her, grasping her leg firmly. Please believe in yourself, as we believed, in our princess. I fought and died for this belief, so please, don't cry. With a final sigh, he went limp. You're an idiot, Sandayu, Yukie told him. You have my eye drops. Standing, she turned and started walking with only 3 words, let's go back. Where are you going? Naruto asked her heatedly. This is your home. You want to go back? Then fight for the home that was taken from you. You don't know anything, she replied icily. There's no spring in Snow Country. It's a place that freezes your tears, even your heart. She turned and continued walking. Naruto charged up to her, grabbing her by the wrist. Wait. She pulled her arm from his grasp. Get away. There was a sudden swooshing sound as a blimp-like object dove into view, Mizore standing in the open doorway. He aimed, and his hand shot forth, grabbing Yukie and pulling her towards him. As soon as she was safely aboard, a rain of kunai with little blue balls attached came down on Sasuke and Kakashi, who had rushed forwards to try and save Yukie. The moment one of the kunai hit the ground, they caused spikes of ice to pop up, spearing whatever was in their way. Sasuke landed on top of one to the spikes, on its flat side, a safe distance from any of its pointy spines. Sakura, he yelled, Where's Naruto? I don't see him, Sasuke-kun. Sakura called back. To herself, she muttered, that idiot, he couldn't have. Koyuki, you have become beautiful, Dotu said to her, where she sat on the couch. Do you have the hexagon crystal with you? Yeah, she said quietly. Good, it is the only thing that connects us as one family, Dotu said, all pretense abandoned. This is also the key for the treasure. The key for the treasure? Yukie asked, doubtful. When I took over the country, the Kazuhana family left me with nothing. Dotu explained. Saozutsu must have hidden his treasure somewhere else. My search took a long time, but I finally found it. It's hidden in the Rainbow Glacier. We saw a hole for a hexagon-shaped crystal. If we got our hands on the Kazuhana family treasure, then we'd have an army stronger than the 5 ninja nations. Yukie had trouble believing him, but went along with it simply to appease him. She didn't know what he'd do if she voiced her disbelief. Now, he turned to her, since he'd been pacing around in his rant, give me the crystal. Reaching up behind her neck, she pulled the crystal off and handed it to him. As he took it though, his smirk quickly turned into a frown. This is... He grabbed Yukie by her coat, lifting her off the floor. Do you take me for a fool? This is fake. A memory flitted through Yuki's mind, the dimness of it suddenly clear as she realized what had happened. Eyes wide, she whispered, Hitaki, Kakashi. What? Dotu asked, teeth gritting together angrily. Ah, now I understand, Ruta said. He's the kind of guy to do something like that. We'll bring Kakashi here immediately. There's no need to do that, they'll come to us soon, Dotu commented slyly, thrusting Yukie onto the couch. We just have to wait. Hours later found Yukie locked in a prison cell with no hope of escape. She just sat on the floor, staring at the bars impassively. No emotion flitted across her face, not fear, anger, sorrow, guilt, or even boredom. She was numb, uncaring of the events happening around her. There was a light clambering and a metal grate fell off an air vent, a person dropping down from the ceiling within the dark room. Bright blue eyes turned to her and she recognized the person as Naruto. He walked up to her cell, stroking the bars gently. He flicked one lightly, listening as it hummed metallically, then smirked. Stay still, he commanded, pulling his sword from its sheath. He walked over to the edge of the door, slashing downwards over the hinges. She almost arched an eyebrow when nothing happened, but her eyes widened as he pulled on the door's bars and it came right out of place, leaving a hole in her jail cell. As Naruto motioned for her to follow him, there was a loud explosion that rocked the building. There was a shout from 2 men down the hall, who had undoubtedly come to check on her. A swoosh met her ears, like that of a curtain fluttering in the wind, and, before she knew what was happening, Naruto had already knocked them unconscious without seeming to have moved an inch from where he stood. Grabbing her by the hand, he pulled her towards the exit, twisting around corners and rushing over bridges. She tried to memorize the turns they made. Left, right, left, left, right, left, right, left, right. As they crossed over one bridge, however, a snow ninja appeared, standing between them and their path to safety. Naruto took a step forward, fingering his sword's hilt. Wait, Naruto, the ninja waved his hands, reaching up to pull off his disguise. Kakashi looked back at him, it's me. Naruto let out a sigh of relief, Kakashi-sensei. Sorry to keep you waiting, Kakashi said. The princess seems alright. Yukie glared, did you exchange the fake hexagon crystal? I'm sorry, Kakashi handed her the real thing, but it seemed like a good idea. All of this for nothing, she muttered. Footsteps echoed and 2 people appeared where Naruto had come from, each wearing a tan cloak. Sakura yelled, don't come this way. Their security is tight. Yukie leading the way, the entire group headed down the path, making for the apparent exit. They followed Yukie into a large room, much like a throne room, with a large chair situated atop a platform. A man stood off of his seat. Dotu, Kakashi yelled. Good work, Koyuki, Dotu said proudly. Breaking into a run, Yukie fled up the stairs, Fubuki, Mizore, and Ruta blocking the ninja from following her. Handing the hexagon crystal to Dotu, she turned to Team 7, it seems you were mistaken. After all, I am an actress. You see, Dotu preened victoriously, you should never have opposed me. I hold all the cards. And Yukie, she fooled you so easily. It was an act the whole time. Yes, Yukie muttered hollowly, it's an act. Pulling a short sword from seemingly nowhere, she turned around and stabbed Dotto with all her might. What? Dotto gasped, staring at his niece with horrified shock. Damn, he reached out, grabbing her by the throat and lifting her off her feet. I knew it all along, Naruto, Yukie told him, glaring at Dotto. I knew that I would die the moment I came back to the land of snow. She looked back at him sadly. It's a good thing you're here, Naruto. See, I didn't run away, even until the very end. Don't be ridiculous, Naruto shouted. You are running away, there's still so much left you have to do. Damn you, Dotto growled, squeezing her neck harder. Die. If I'm going to die, Yukie forced out, glaring at Dotto, then I'm, at least, going to. She twisted the knife. With a wince, Dotto stumbled backwards, still holding onto his niece, dangerously close to the edge of the platform. With a final gasp, they fell off of the pillar that held the throne and onto the floor. Out of nowhere, Naruto rushed over to the fallen bodies, reaching for Yukie. Before he could so much as shake her, however, Dotto's fist came up and smashed into his face, knocking him back towards his team with a thud. Naruto stood, glaring at the large man with cold blue eyes as he rubbed his sore cheek. This toy knife can't kill me. Dotto laughed, shedding his cloak. There was a familiar bodysuit beneath it, the panel in the center glowing ominously. That's right, this is the newest chakra armor. He picked Yukie up, tucking her under one arm. Come on. Let's go, Koyuki, to the other side of the rainbow. Mechanical wings spreading from the back of his armor, Dotto took off through the broken ceiling. As the building started to collapse, the snow ninja spread their own wings and took off after him. Cursing, Team 7 left for the exit as a white aura leapt to life around Naruto. Bankai. Once more, ice spread over Naruto's body to form wings, claws, flowers, a gauntlet, and a tail. The metal ground beneath his feet became brittle after such a change in temperature, falling away even as he stood there. Spreading his icy wings, Naruto took off into the sky after his enemy, following the arrogant Dotto through the clouds. He wouldn't let Yukie down. Sasuke stopped suddenly, watching as Sakura raced on ahead. He glanced behind him, where he could sense the chakra of the enemy Kunoichi that was following him. He schooled his face into the blank look he was so famous for as she came closer, his hand twitching in anxious anticipation. You know, he said quietly, you've already seen Naruto's abilities. How about I show you mine? Hey, she scoffed as he reached for his sword. Whatever, brat, it still won't save you. Sasuke's blade slowly slid from its sheath, the metal grating against the wood with a sharp ring. Sasuke turned around steadily, gripping his blade loosely in his right hand. His eyes flashed red as he spoke the words, Bansho Isai Kaijin Tenace, Ryujin Jaka. Burn all the world to ashes, flowing flame blade. Fubuki's eyes slowly widened as flames leapt to life around Sasuke's sword, dripping onto the ground and forming a wall that prevented any escape on foot. She was trapped in his technique with no way out but victory. In order to live and leave, she had to beat down this little punk standing in front of her. A slow smirk spread across her lips, baring her pearly teeth to the night air. Who was she kidding? This little brat didn't stand a chance. Her armor negated his chakra, so his technique here was pointless and useless against her. She had absolutely nothing to worry about. In a flash of fire, Sasuke had leapt forward at her. Unprepared, she couldn't block his attack in time to minimize the damage. A shriek of pain and agony left her mouth as her left hand fell to the ground, the skin around the wound cauterized shut by his sword. She stared at the stump on her left arm, then looked back at the boy standing there stoically. Fear flooded her veins. Come, Sasuke said coldly, holding his blade out in front of him. Dotto dropped Yukie on her butt, walking over to the altar in the middle of the snow. Grinning greedily, he put the hexagon crystal in the opening in the altar, watching as it sunk and the altar glowed. The glow extended along the ground and to the glaciers surrounding them, lighting them up beautifully. Where is the treasure? Dotto asked eagerly, ignoring the beautiful radiance of the glaciers. Where is the treasure? Steam rose around him as the ice and snow began to melt, revealing patches of green grass. Warm, Yukie commented. This is, where is this heat coming from? Dotto asked angrily, brow knit in frustration. Isn't this where the Kazuhana family treasure is? Princess. A familiar voice called. Dotto and Yukie looked towards the voice, the former of who brought his arms up to protect his face. A sword crashed into his forearms, pushing against the armor that protected them. Wings of ice beat harshly as the armor resisted the icy touch of Naruto's powerful blade. It seemed that Dotu's armor was indeed the most advanced version. With a mighty heave, Dotu managed to push the blonde back, where he hovered a few feet off the ground, a mighty glare on his face. Dotu growled angrily, screwing his face up with the deepest scowl he could muster. This boy had ruined all of his plans, all of his carefully laid schemes. They all went up in smoke because of this one boy. Damn, Dotu swore furiously, going through hand seals. Hyoten, Kokuryu Hufusitsu, Black Dragon Blizzard. Dotu punched the air, sending a black dragon towards the blonde. Naruto himself scowled as the dragon came closer, standing still as it roared towards him with its ethereal fangs bared in fury. There was a crash and a cloud of dust and smoke rose up around the blonde, obscuring his form from view. Naruto, Yukie cried out sorrowfully. Dotu smirked victoriously, but it dropped the instant the smoke was blown away, revealing an orb of ice that quickly separated. Naruto, it was revealed, had used his wings to form a shield around his body, protecting him from the attack that Dotu had thrown his way. Such a weak attack, Naruto said coldly, his eyes frigid. Such weak intent. No, it's not just the attack or the intent. You are weak. Naruto raised his sword, and because you are weak, your dragon is weak. In the end, it shall be your greed and your weakness that kills you. The blade bit into the ground and, with a fierce rumble that shook Yukie to her core, 3 ice pillars rose on Dotu, one encasing his legs from the hip down, and one encasing the wrist and hand of each arm. They held him still and kept him from moving, leaving his chest as the most vulnerable part of his body. Were there a cross behind him, he would have looked like he was being crucified. Naruto suddenly leapt into the air, soaring higher and higher into the sky until he was naught but a dark speck in front of the clouds. A dragon came screaming down, its head the size of Dotu's body and its long, icy hide trailing behind as it let loose a titanic roar. At speeds that would have decimated tempered steel, it collided, nose first, with the disc on Dotu's chest that powered his armor. Slowly, the dragon's face and body evaporated into the air, revealing Naruto with his sword stabbed into the disc on Dotu's chest, his wings folded for aerodynamic efficiency and his tail whipping behind him, his eyes cold as ice slowly crept across the disc powering Dotu's armor. The disc cracked as Naruto spoke his words, Hakyoku ni Jeshoku. Lunar eclipse in the Arctic. He jerked his sword back and held his left hand forward, gathering chakra in the palm of his hand. An orb formed, floating several centimeters above his fingers as it spun to an inaudible command, whipping the wind near itself around and around in circles. Naruto turned icy blue eyes onto Dotu, rearing his hand back for a strike. I believe in you, Naruto. Yukie called out over the distance, even as the sun rose and the swirling chakra glowed to match the rainbow colors of the glacier. The Sky Princess acknowledges you as the strongest ninja. This is the end. Your future is death, Naruto said quietly, jerking his hand forward and driving his deadly attack straight into Dotu's unprotected and vulnerable chest. Rasengan. Dotu's mouth snapped open in a silent scream as the spiraling chakra sank into his body, the ice holding him in place breaking and shattering as the force from the attack sent him flying. He jerked backwards as his body picked up height and speed, soaring over the melting ice and snow and colliding solidly with one of the glowing glaciers. Spider web cracks spread through the ice upon impact, reaching out from the body that had caused so much damage. Dotu was dead. As the ice and snow melted, so did Naruto's foreign appendages evaporate into the warming air. With a soft smile, he reached up and sheathed his sword, the newly revealed grass bending beneath his superior weight. With a gentle gait, he stepped forward and walked towards the princess sitting with a dumbstruck look on her face. He offered her a hand and a smile. Well, I told you, didn't I? Naruto leaned back against the fence, his fingers laced together behind his head as he watched the proceedings. Sasuke, Sakura, and Kakashi, the rest of Team 7, stood beside him, their eyes also watching the parade as the Land of Snow, renamed as the Land of Spring, celebrated the ascension to power of their princess. Dressed in ceremonial garb, with a large, pink, bamboo shade perched atop her head, Yukie sat on her throne as the denizens of her country partied as if it were the last day of their lives. Around the sprawling capital city, posters hung depicting the visages of Team 7 and Yukie. No face was bereft of a happy smile. Children ran through the streets, throwing paper shuriken at one another as they fought mock battles against each other. Some wore black vests and pants with gloves on their hands and wooden swords tied to their backs, others wore the high-collared blue shirts of the Uchiha clan, while some even wore a bandana around their foreheads, with one side tilted down over their left eye. Men drank of their beloved sake, pouring the delicious rice wine over each other's heads in jest, laughing or singing slurred words and verses in their drunken stupor. Wives tugged sharply at their husbands' ears, pulling their respective men away from the intoxicating beverage that held so much sway on the male mind. "So, winter is gone for good?" Naruto asked, fingers laced behind his spiky mane of blonde hair. "Yes," Yukie nodded, "the land of snow really is the land of spring, now." "That's too bad, don't you think?" Sakura asked. "Now your acting talent will go to waste." "Who said I was going to stop acting?" Yukie smiled. In her hands was a script with an orange cover, the words, "Ika Ika Paradiseu," emblazoned in bold lettering. "I can be Snow Country's queen and an actress. It would be stupid to give up one for the other, wouldn't it?" That script," Kakashi stuttered as Yukie walked away. She was attacked by kids down the street, each one begging for an autograph she was happy to give. "That script, she's perfect." Sasuke and Sakura sighed, each grabbing one of Kakashi's arms and pulling him away. "Come on, Kakashi-sensei." Shaking his head, Naruto made follow them when a hand stopped him short. Wary of who the hand belonged to, Naruto turned his head around to look into the black eyes that fit to a familiar face. The owner's nose and lips were hidden behind the high collar of an ankle-length, tattered red mantle that seemed to have seen years' worth of travel. Dark brown hair, no doubt the result of a brown-on-black dye job, framed the figure's face in a way that Naruto knew intimately, a conical bamboo shade covering his head. Thin, premature age lines descended diagonally from the figure's eyes, slowly fading into the young flesh of his cheeks. A dirty, crimson bandana hid his forehead from view, pushing down slightly on his eyebrows. The eyes curved upwards in a slight mimicry of Kakashi's famous "I smile," and Naruto knew that the man's lips were curling in a way that they hadn't for nearly 6 years. Before he could say a word, Itachi's smooth voice whispered to him, "Would you mind leading this hopelessly lost wanderer home, Naruto-kun?" As Naruto nodded dumbly, Itachi pushed something metallic into his open palm, then closed it so that the contents wouldn't fall. As the disguised Uchiha slowly left to follow the rest of Team 7, Naruto unfurled his fingers and gasped as he saw exactly what it was that Itachi had given to him. They would prove his loyalty to Konoha without a doubt. Resting idly against the flesh of his palm were the Akatsuki rings of Uchiha Itachi and Hoshigaki Kisame. Tsunade, the fifth Hokage of Konoha, frowned, looking down at the young man that kneeled in front of her submissively with suspicion in her amber gaze. His head was bowed, showing her a crown of dark brown locks that could only be the result of a desperate dye job. His breathing was calm and deep, as though he were not afraid of whatever judgment she would make of him. She could sense no nervousness or fear from the 17-year-old before her. His neck bared enough for any fool to make a swift, killing blow. He was trusting his life in her hands, almost like he was not a mass murderer with a humongous bounty on his head. He seemed as if nothing had changed since he was 13, as if he was simply requesting or reporting for another mission. She looked over toward Jiraiya, noting dully that he looked as serious as she had ever seen him, and silently asked a second time if the story he had told her was true. The white-haired pervert nodded solemnly, telling her just as silently that the information he had given her just a few days ago was indeed true. Her frown deepened. Naruto stood by the door, his arms folded in front of his chest and his half-lidded blue eyes watching the scene with an aloofness that even Hyuga Hiyashi would admire. He was, Tsunade noticed with a hint of sadness, becoming more and more like the ninja he was supposed to be. A Chunin flak jacket was leaned up against the wall behind his leg. "Oi, Ba-chan," Naruto called calmly, swallowing his fear as she turned a narrowed eye onto him. "Aren't you going to even ask for evidence of his loyalty or something like that?" Naruto suppressed a shiver as Tsunade threw a dark glare at him, her right eyebrow twitching dangerously beneath her blonde bangs. He gulped at the promise of pain hidden deep within her molten chocolate gaze, a thick drop of sweat trickling down his face as a vein started to pulse visibly on her forehead. "He's right, Tsunade-hime," Jiraiya said calmly. Naruto breathed a sigh of relief as the woman's intense glare was refocused onto the white-haired man, her burning eyes willing the toad sage to burst into flame spontaneously. Jiraiya seemed unfazed. "It's your responsibility as Hokage to review all the evidence and facts before making a judgment," the pervert continued, his eyes unwavering and strong. He was firm in his conviction and was taking the situation with all of the seriousness it deserved. Naruto had a newfound respect for him. Tsunade hung her head and sighed, leaning back against her thick wooden desk. I know that. She looked up at Itachi expectantly. Well, do you have any proof of your loyalty? Itachi seemed to hesitate, then pointed at Naruto. My first piece of evidence, or rather, my first two pieces of evidence, rest on Naruto-kun's fingers. Taking his cue, Naruto held up his right hand so that his Hokage could get a better look at it. Resting snugly on his ring finger and his middle finger were the Akatsuki rings of Uchiha Itachi and Hoshigaki Kisame. One bore the kanji character for Suzaku, and the other bore the character for South. I see, Tsunade nodded, but if that is all you have. No, Itachi responded, pulling a scroll from the depths of his mantle, I have more. He laid a scroll out on the floor, unraveling it so that the assembled group could see that it was a storage scroll. He bit his thumb, wiping the blood that gathered onto the paper, then flipped through hand seals. He finished quickly, placing his palms against the edge of the delicate but sturdy rice paper. In a flash, two pieces of a legendary sword sat in Tsunade's office. Is that? Jiraiya asked quietly. Samahata. Itachi nodded. I retrieved the two halves of this sword before I set out to make contact with Naruto-kun. Without the life force of its original owner present, it was unable to resist me. As it was, in two pieces, its sentient mind is slowly dying, though its powers are no less weak. Which means that it could be reforged into something else, Naruto injected, eyes fixed on the broken sword. It could be melted down and shaped into armor, or even several new swords. Since Naruto-kun is the one who broke it, Itachi said, glancing back at the boy, I think he deserves to decide what shall be done with it. Naruto shrugged at the two Sanin's questioning looks, confirming that he had indeed cut it in two, then spoke, I don't really have any need of it, so it should be made into ninja for the Anbu. I think they'll find it really useful. Very well, I'll have our best blacksmith get to work immediately. Tsunade turned back to Itachi. Any more evidence? Yes, Itachi nodded, pulling two scrolls from his mantle, the last words of the Sandaime Hokage and the head of Hoshigaki Kisame. Eyes wide, Tsunade reached out and grasped the scrolls, one of which had a seal on it that could only belong to her sensei, Sarutobi. The other had splotches of blood along the edges and bloody fingerprints on the outside, both dried up and dyed maroon from age. She handed the bloody scroll to Jiraiya, who took it with something of a grimace on his face. With haste born of anxiety, Tsunade tore open the scroll in her hands, her eyes scanning the paper with a critical gaze that left even Itachi impressed. She looked up at several points in her reading, either at Itachi himself or at Naruto, no doubt trying to justify the words before her. Her lips fell into a sad smile as she read the last bits of it, her eyes settling on Naruto, who shifted uncomfortably. She sighed as she rolled the scroll back up, looking over at Jiraiya. Her face twisted into a look of disgust as he grimaced, holding up the severed head of the infamous ninja Hoshigaki Kisame. There was a hole in the man's forehead, right beneath the metal plate of his Hitai-8, and a surprised look on his face, his mouth opened slightly in fear to reveal sharp teeth. Jiraiya held him by his blue hair. Tsunade sighed, all right, we have the evidence needed. Welcome back, Itachi-san. There's only one problem, Jiraiya said, frowning as he resealed Kisame's head, what are we going to tell the villagers? A mischievous and evil smile crept over Naruto's lips as an idea popped into his head, I think I know what we can say to them. Sasuke slowly walked into the plaza, noting absently that it seemed every person in Konoha was gathered for whatever purpose Tsunade had summoned them. Looking over, he could see Sakura and Ino chatting, probably taking guesses about what was going on. He didn't see Naruto anywhere, though, and snorted as he figured that the blonde was eating ramen somewhere. Sasuke turned his dark gaze over to the stage that Tsunade stood upon and saw a tall man that couldn't be older than 17 standing next to the Hokage. There was something familiar about the man, the hairstyle in particular, but he couldn't place his finger on what it was that made the man seem memorable. Or rather, he couldn't place his finger on who the man reminded him of. It bugged him. It was even more annoying than when Naruto had worn those god-awful orange jumpsuits. Those he could handle, simply because it was Naruto who wore them. The nagging feeling in the back of his head, however, he could not handle. It kept telling him that he should recognize that man standing up on the stage. That he knew that man. Sasuke growled lightly, wishing that Tsunade would just get this whole announcement thing over with, so that he could go home and ponder this problem properly. But there were still people who had yet to arrive, people who, for whatever reason, needed to hear this speech that she was going to give. So Sasuke waited. Finally, after everyone had arrived, the grand and mighty 5th Hokage spoke up, her strong voice carrying out over the massive crowd standing before her. People of Konoha. I have gathered you here today to tell you the truth of a matter that has long since been misunderstood and misinterpreted. Get on with it, Sasuke growled lightly, scowling up at the youthful face of the Hokage. The truth that you know is nothing more than a lie, she claimed, her voice echoing across the silent mass of citizens and ninja. Her fierce, chocolatey brown eyes bore into the gaze of everyone present, forcing their attention onto her. I have come here today to speak to you about an event that has bred a great misconception. Sasuke's eyes narrowed as she continued her speech, her words strong and unwavering. There was an unsettling feeling in the pit of his stomach, as though something was wrong with this entire setup, this entire event. With a muffled curse, he turned his Sharingan on and immediately felt his stomach drop. She was lying. I have come here today to speak to you about one single event, she continued, her gaze firm and unwavering. I have come here today to speak to you about that dreaded event nearly 5 years ago. As I'm sure all of you have guessed, that event is... No, Sasuke whispered disbelievingly, his eyes wide as she pressed on. The Uchiha massacre, she finished, her lips drawn tight as the entire assembly looked at her with awe and surprise. What you have been told is a lie. Uchiha Itachi was not the man who slaughtered the Uchiha clan. Uchiha Itachi is a victim of a dastardly plot, as well as circumstance. Her eyes swept over the entire group. We have learned recently, from the mouth of the man himself, that Orochimaru desires the Sharingan above all else. He wants its power to learn every technique the ninja world has to offer. With the Sharingan, he could accomplish that, and the Uchiha clan was the only clan with the Sharingan. We have also learned, she went on, ignoring the looks she got, that he wanted the eyes of the strongest Uchiha he could find. He wanted the eyes of Uchiha Itachi. But Itachi was too well protected. He had an entire village, as well as his clan, to back him up. So Orochimaru resorted to the best possible plan he could execute in order to get Itachi's eyes. Her face became grave. He killed the entire clan and framed Itachi for it all. The gasps of horror that followed were expected, but she ignored them. By framing Itachi, he hoped to force him out of the village, where he would be helpless against the Snake Sennin's attacks and tricks. But Orochimaru was wary. Itachi was the strongest Uchiha since Madara. Defeating him would not be easy. So he left some insurance. He spared Uchiha Sasuke and left him alive in case Itachi proved too strong. She's lying, Sasuke whispered to himself, confused. But why would she be lying about this? Unless... He looked over at the man standing on the stage, his Sharingan peering at and memorizing the familiar stranger's appearance. His eyes widened to impossible size as the supposed identity of the man was revealed. But, was that truly Itachi standing up there, looking as if the world was calm and everything was alright? What Orochimaru didn't know, Tsunade went on, is that Itachi was reporting to the Hokage about the incident the moment that Orochimaru left the village to wait for him. At the time, there was no conceivable way to prove Itachi's innocence, so he was sent out on a spying mission. Luckily for us, Itachi proved too powerful for him to beat. Recently, Tsunade held up a scroll. The Sandaim's last words were found and shown to me. In this scroll was the proof of Itachi's innocence. And so, Itachi was recalled and brought back here where he could do the most good as one of our elites. She gestured to the brown-haired man standing on the stage with her. As he walked forward, she introduced him. People of Konoha, I give you one of our most powerful shinobi and the man who killed Hoshigaki Kisame, Uchiha Itachi. There was a loud roar of approval from the crowd as Itachi bowed, but Tsunade ignored it all in favor of scanning the members of the gathering. She frowned as she looked amongst their numbers, but the person she was looking for was absent. Uchiha Sasuke had left the assembly. This did not bode well. Sasuke bit his lip, rolling over the information he had learned in his mind. He felt anger boil up inside his belly as he thought about everything, and his curse seal reacted to that anger, flaring to life painfully. He stifled a groan as he forced the wretched mark back down, his lip bleeding from where he had bitten into it. I want the truth, Sasuke demanded, glaring at the team that was unpacking and rearranging his old room. In a strange sense of déjà vu, it almost seemed like the older boy was merely coming back from another mission. The truth, Itachi asked calmly, arching his eyebrow slightly. I know Tsunade was lying. Sasuke shouted angrily. Tell me the truth, the real reason why you killed the clan. Sasuke let out a shuddering sigh, leaning back against the tree he was sitting in. It had been a few hours since he had asked that question, demanding that Itachi tell him the truth and not the lie that Tsunade had conjured. Itachi had seemed hesitant at first, as if he didn't want to tell Sasuke for whatever reason. I killed them, Itachi said slowly, because I was ordered to. What? Sasuke hissed quietly, eyes narrowed. The clan had plans, Itachi continued vaguely, plans that would have weakened the village more than the Nine Tails attack did. They were so obsessed with their own supposed superiority that they were willing to sacrifice the whole village in order to prove their strength. I had to stop that from occurring, or else we all would have been torn apart. Itachi's words from so long ago had popped into Sasuke's mind unbidden at that point, and he suddenly could tie that into what Itachi had tried to tell him. Obsessed with the organization, obsessed with the clan, obsessed with our lineage, Itachi had hissed at those policemen, a worthless compulsion that enslaves us, limits our capabilities, leading us to fear what you don't understand. Then those words that followed, I've had enough. There's no hope left for this pathetic clan. The people of this clan are all the same. You focus on the trivial and lose sight of what's most important. Change is impossible in this fog of ignorance. How can we evolve when regulation is all we know? He didn't want to believe it, that Itachi had been justified in his murder of the clan. It seemed impossible that the noble Uchiha clan was capable of such a dastardly plot, that they had actually planned to destroy the village to prove their strength, that his mother had been involved in it all. The Hokage tried to convince them otherwise, subtly, without letting on that he knew about their plots, that I had told him what they intended to do, Itachi had continued. But they didn't stop. They were too loyal to the clan. They put that loyalty above their loyalty to the village. Inevitably, it became impossible to change their ways. I was offered the mission to exterminate them for the good of the village. I accepted. Itachi lifted haunted red eyes to meet Sasuke's wide black ones. You can't understand, Sasuke, because you didn't grow up the same way I did. You didn't see the horror of the Third Great Shinobi War. I knew that, if the clan succeeded, the village would be too vulnerable to defend itself. If that happened, a Fourth Great War was imminent. Liar, Sasuke had yelled, punching the older boy in the face. Itachi didn't block or dodge, his face twisting to the side with Sasuke's momentum. There was no blood, only the dull pain in Sasuke's knuckles. Liar, Sasuke whispered aloud, hugging his knees to his chest. You're such a liar, Itachi. Sasuke tensed, grasping at the mid-length sword strapped to his back. With a sharp, metallic rasp, it slid from its wooden sheath as Sasuke stood, slicing through the wires that had attempted to bind him to his tree. He adjusted his grip on his weapon, brandishing it in front of himself as the wires fell, cut and useless. Well, an oily voice cooed from the foliage, perhaps he's not as useless as we first thought, eh? You're right, Saken, another voice called, a cockier tone to it, and it seems that little twig of his has some use as well. Here was me, thinking that slab of steel wouldn't even cut butter. Whoever you are, Sasuke's eyes flashed, their irises bleeding into crimson red from their normal dark black shade. You should know better than to attack a member of the elite Uchiha clan. With 3 puffs of thick smoke, 3 corresponding summoned creatures, demons as they appeared to be, appeared on the tree with Sasuke. Flute music picked up in the crisp night air, ringing in the ears of Sasuke and the strange blind monsters. He scowled as the beasts charged towards him in perfect tandem, moving to the tune of the music. Breaking into a soft run, Sasuke moved on a collision course with the beasts, muttering under his breath as he did so, Bansho Issai Kaijin Tenace, Ryujin Jaka. As flames engulfed his sword in a fiery blaze, he swiped at the first monster, biting deep into its unnatural flesh and its ugly hide. With a dark growl and an explosion of smoke, the beast disappeared into nothingness, unable to retain its form after the fatal blow that Sasuke had dealt to it. The other creatures became more wary. The flute seemed to pick up speed and become more frantic, moving at a much faster tempo than before. The beasts responded to this increase in speed and followed suit, jumping towards Sasuke with more agility than before. Sasuke ducked under the swing of a particularly brutal-looking club and stabbed forward, impaling the second beast on his flaming sword. It vanished. The music dancing in the air picked up even more speed, but that didn't matter to Sasuke. He rushed the final monster, ducking and weaving through its vicious and desperate strikes as it tried to kill him. As he stabbed its heart then beheaded it with his sword of fire, he idly wondered if such a beast were capable of feeling emotions like desperation. As the final summoned creature disappeared in an explosion of smoke, Sasuke turned his impassive gaze towards the four strange ninja who had been watching the entire bout with amusement. His menacing Sharingan eyes swirled as he looked at each of them in turn, his lips curling slightly. "Who are you?" "Who are we?" The gray-haired one chuckled loudly, his lips an unnatural shade of green. "We are the Sound Four, or the Otogakur no Shinobi Yonenshu. You can call me Saken of the West Gate. I am Jorubo of the South Gate," the tubby one said sternly, his arms folded in front of his chest. Idly, Sasuke thought he could pass himself off as an Akamichi if he wanted. "I'm Kyurinmaru of the East Gate," the one with 6 arms smirked. Sasuke recognized him as the cockier voice from before. "I'm Tayuya of the North Gate," the red-haired girl said with her hands on her hips, glaring at him. "Don't forget it, you stupid bastard." "I see," Sasuke muttered, gauging his opponent's strengths and weaknesses. If he remembered correctly, based on the sound genin from the Chunin Exams, ninja from Otogakur were often lousy team fighters. He smirked, the flames from his blade illuminating his face in a dark light. "Is that what you'd like me to put on your gravestones?" Tayuya swore. Then, in a flash, they all leapt at each other, each side determined to pound the other into the ground. Ducking under Saken's high kick, Sasuke grabbed the other boy's leg, spinning around and throwing the silver-haired ninja into the oncoming Kyurinmaru. Tayuya was next, but Sasuke merely moved to the side, tripping her with his right leg and digging his elbow into her spine, right between her shoulder blades. She fell to the bark and didn't move. With a jerk of his arm, the fire on his sword went out and he sheathed it with a dark scoff. These guys weren't even worth his blade. Sasuke turned his head as Jorubo let out a battle cry, charging at him like a wounded rhino. Sasuke's lip curled into a sneer and he vanished in a blur, reappearing in front of the large ninja with his elbow buried in the larger boy's gut. Jorubo fell backwards and didn't move. "If this is the extent of your power, the extent of the power Orochimaru has given you, Sound 4, then I'm not impressed," Sasuke said smugly, his Sharingan fading back into black. "Orochimaru needs to find better help. You guys, you're pathetic." Sasuke felt his lips curl in satisfaction as the 4 sound ninjas stood up unscathed, each wearing a smirk on his or her face as black markings slowly crept across their skin. Crimson red bled into his black eyes as 2 tomo swirling around his pupils appeared within his irises, spinning around and around like a wheel. "I'll become stronger, Itachi," Sasuke thought as a dark smirk crept onto his lips. "Then, when I'm strong enough to beat you, I'll force you to tell me the truth. No more lies, big brother. No more lies from your mouth." Sasuke jumped backwards, flipping through hand seals as Saken rushed forward to attack him. He stopped on the tiger seal, inhaling deeply as chakra gathered in his lungs. He blew outward and a giant fireball was conjured, barreling into the unprepared Saken, consuming him in a ball of crackling flames. Tayuya was next, leaping towards him in an inevitable taijutsu clash. Sasuke ducked underneath her right hook and kneed her squarely in her unprotected stomach, bringing his elbow up over her as she heaved and collapsed in on herself. Like before, the Uchiha's bony elbow came down and landed right between her shoulders. She crashed against the tree bark, sending splinters in the air, but Sasuke was already gone. Kyurinmaru was after her and, before the 6-armed teen knew what had hit him, 3 of his arms were broken and hanging by his side at odd angles. He screamed as pain, like liquid fire, rushed through his limbs, racking pain receptors like looting bandits. He never saw the right hook aimed at his cheek before he went flying into the wall of a nearby building. Jorubo stumbled forward, roaring like a wounded rhinoceros and moving like a sumo wrestler, his hands reaching for his opponent. Sasuke scoffed at the larger boy, disappearing in a flash and reappearing behind his enemy, hovering in midair as his kick soared forward and crashed against the giant teen's skull, sending him diving forward into the wood. Sasuke smirked, letting out a mocking chuckle. "Just as I said, pathetic." Saken stood first, his already blistering red skin darkening to crimson as his sclera blackened and an ugly fleshy red horn grew upwards from his forehead. Tayuya's skin darkened and tanned, horns growing out through her hair and forming a sort of crown on her head. The other two underwent similar mutations, each one more disturbing than the last. Before Sasuke could move to parry their attacks, Sôten had knocked him down and Sasuke found himself staring up into those pitiless yellow eyes. He rolled out of the way as a vicious punch came down towards him, splintering the hard wood of the tree branch and sinking halfway through the limb. Instantly, Sasuke moved, flickering in their vision as he appeared behind Sôten, his sword held in a reverse grip. Blood suddenly gushed out of the other ninja's back as a stab wound became clear a few inches from his right shoulder, doubtlessly puncturing his right lung. Sasuke hissed, using Naruto's name for the technique, Senga. Flash Fang. Yuya came charging at him next, calling out a battle cry as she aimed her fist for his unprotected head. He spun around swiftly, his sword moving like a phantom past his right hip and upwards. The strike caught Yuya unprepared, slipping past her guard easily. Her shirt and chest bindings suddenly split open, revealing her bare breasts to the boy in front of her. A thin red cut arced up from her left hip, rolling over the swell of her right breast and ending at her shoulder. Her nipples hardened in the cool night air and, with a shriek of embarrassment, she covered herself up with her arms, her bronze cheeks flooded with red. Sasuke's fist came from nowhere, colliding solidly with her cheek and sending her flying to the floor where she lay, motionless, her breasts exposed to the air. He blushed and looked away, half wishing he had kept his Sharingan on to burn that image to memory. Kyubi jumped at him next and Sasuke immediately turned his attention towards the six-armed teen, his sword flashing. He made two cuts into the red flesh of his enemy, the first one an exact opposite of the one on Yuya and the second one a horizontal strike that had been meant to disembowel the spider-like foe. It failed, but Kyubi collapsed backwards anyway. Jorubo was last and charged towards Sasuke like a rampaging hippopotamus, roaring like a stampeding elephant and growling like a pouncing lion. Sasuke's arm seemed to move of its own accord, stabbing the ninja into the giant teen's thick, round thigh. Blood spewed forth like a fountain, and for a second, Sasuke wondered if he had perhaps severed the femoral artery. There was another roar and Kyubi had leapt at him again, all six fists raised and prepared to pummel Sasuke into the ground. Ryujin Jaka came to life in its wielder's palms, flames consuming the blade in a blaze of fiery glory. Sasuke made to end Kyubi's life with his flaming sword when something unexpected happened. Sasuke's cursed seal came to life at the last second, bringing with it a crippling pain that brought Sasuke to his knees and a cry of agony from his lips. Ryujin Jaka's flames vanished into thin air and little black marks began to spread over the Uchiha's shoulder and neck. Kyubi's fist struck true, sending Sasuke into the tree trunk with vicious ferocity. Ryujin Jaka became embedded in the wood as Sasuke curled up into a fetal ball, clutching at the skin of his neck and scratching the flesh surrounding the cursed mark raw. Kyubi grinned at this and walked up to the boy, rearing his fists back. He threw punch after punch at the Uchiha, clobbering the teen with all his strength. "You can't control it, can you?" he asked smugly, standing back to gaze at the small bruises he had inflicted. "You can't control your mark." He sent one more punch at the boy and tipped him on his side, grinning nastily. "Control of that mark is power, and power is what you want, right? Come with us, and we'll give you that power." Cackling sadistically, Kyubi picked up his comrades and disappeared into the calm stillness of the night, his laughter echoing through the air. The night was dark, filling the air with a calm stillness that belied the true nature it held in its icy grasp. Mist crept along the ground like a sneaky thief, hiding those who wished to remain hidden and obscuring the ground like a blanket of thin silk. All was quiet and not a person moved amongst the deceptive stillness. A shadow suddenly became visible through the heavy fog, gliding along like a specter searching for his next victim or a place to haunt. The mist moved away from the shadow, as if afraid of it or the might it may hold. Slowly, steadily, the identity of the phantom shade became known, and Uchiha Sasuke was its name. Slung over his back was a pack full of clothes and such the like, as if he were going camping or on vacation. Were it not for the deep scowl planted firmly on his lips, like tent bolted into the soft ground, then it might have been misconstrued for an overnight stay at one of his friends' houses. Anyone who knew Uchiha Sasuke, however, would also know that he wasn't one to go on camping trips with anyone or on vacation for any reason or even stay the night at his friend's house, like a normal child his age. In fact, anyone who knew Sasuke would tell you that he was downright unfriendly, and even cold and apathetic. Sasuke frowned as he continued walking forwards, ignoring the chilling mist as it caressed his bare shins as intimately as a lover, water droplets clinging to his smooth legs. His face was damp, an invisible sheen of water and vapor masking his face and his bare forehead. He rubbed his brow nervously, feeling almost naked without his Hittite. Itachi hadn't been home when Sasuke had decided to leave, which made it all that much easier to escape the ancestral home of the Uchiha. It would have been decidedly harder to run away if Itachi had been there to prevent him from going. Luckily, his elder brother was probably out on some mission or other. "Why, Ni-san, why did you do this?" Tears, hot and salty and pouring down his cheeks, black eyes wide with fear and anguish. "Foolish little brother, blood, endless pools of blood stained the brown earth a sickly maroon. Mother and father lying dead on the floor, crimson soaking into the wood and the mats." A tall teen, almost abnormally so considering his age of 13, walked into the light, his crimson eyes whirling and glaring dispassionately. Fear, uncontrollable fear flooded him in the face of certain death. Sasuke shivered, rubbing his arms to warm himself in the cool night air. He continued walking, his footsteps silent and steady. His sandals made no sound as they clapped against the ground, his toes disappearing in the dense fog. He was like a phantom, a specter that did not exist and lacked the ability to make sound. "If you wish to kill me, then hate me, despise me, and live in an unsightly manner." Sharp gasps and killing intent, suffocating him in his lungs as he desperately tried to breathe. Blood painted the walls, the ceiling, the floor, even the ground was stained red. Crimson oozed from the small cracks between the wooden boards. "Run, run and cling to your pathetic life." Then, one day, Tomo swirled together, forming a shuriken shape that spun slowly. "When you have the same eyes as I do, come before me." "Sasuke-kun," a voice called softly, reaching through the thick vapor blanket that should have shrouded him in anonymity. Sasuke froze, his body going rigid as he thought up maneuver after maneuver to ensure his escape. Each one was rejected. He wouldn't hurt Sakura. Sakura, he turned to look at her, but she recoiled, as if frightened of his cold, emotionless eyes and his toneless voice. "What are you doing up this late?" She stuttered, as if unsure of her words. "I came to see you. I thought you might need some company." He almost arched an eyebrow, calmly responding, "Why's that?" "Well," she glanced at her feet nervously, "things seem to be changing recently. Your brother came back home. I thought, maybe you needed someone to talk to, someone to listen to you and pay attention to you." Sasuke didn't respond. "Is there?" Sakura started hesitantly. "Something wrong?" "No," Sasuke replied after a moment, "nothing's wrong." He turned away from her, forgetting that he had a backpack on his shoulders. "Everything's fine. Go home, get some rest." There was a muffled sob from behind him and it took all his control not to turn around and address her tears, whether to quell them and comfort her or to simply watch as she fell apart in front of him, he didn't know. But the urge was there all the same and he had to clench his knee muscles tight to prevent from turning on his heel. "Why, Sasuke-kun," she cried, tears rolling over her delicate cheeks. "Why won't you say something to me?" "I'm leaving, Sakura," he said after a pause, his voice soft. "I'm leaving so I can get stronger, strong enough to force the truth from Itachi. I need that strength, the strength to make my brother tell me the reason he killed our clan." "The curse mark?" Sakura asked quietly, trying to stem the flow of her tears. She hiccuped, sniffling as she wiped the water from her eyes. "Orochimaru gave it to me," Sasuke said simply, as though she hadn't known that. "He gave me that power. If I go to him, I can learn to control it and gain even more power. Power that can help me force the truth from Itachi. Is that all you care about, power?" she cried hysterically, her voice trembling with more pain than he'd ever thought possible. "Do I mean so little to you? Has all we've been through been for nothing? You're just going to throw everything we've ever accomplished away, just for some lousy truth that you're probably better off not knowing. Why can't you see it?" Her knees buckled and she collapsed to the cobblestone beneath her, sobbing into her hands. Her voice was meek and desperate. "Why can't you see that I love you?" A pair of warm arms swept her into a soft embrace, holding her against a muscled chest she'd been dreaming of for the better part of 3 years. She latched onto his shirt, sobbing into his shoulder. "I love you, Sasuke-kun. Please don't go." The kiss was soft and tender and unexpected, but Sakura didn't care. All she cared about was the warmth pooling in her stomach and spreading outwards. Suddenly, all her pains were gone and all her tears dried. All that mattered was the soft pair of lips pressed against her own, massaging her fears and pains away. Goodbye, Sakura. She was starting to feel drowsy, even as his words were whispered into her ear. And, thank you. Genjutsu, Sakura thought absently. Then, her vision faded into black. Naruto had a bad feeling, not unlike the one he had when he had first met Kisame and Itachi in the inn while he and Jiraiya had looked for Tsunade. It was an acute sense of foreboding, and it usually warned him, quite accurately, of when something bad was about to happen or had happened. Naruto glanced to his left. Shikamaru stood next to him, wearing his Chunin vest over top his normal attire and standing straight and alert. That was uncharacteristic of Shikamaru and proved that his danger senses were most likely correct in their detection of something wrong and of foul play. This whole thing had Orochimaru written all over it. As if Shikamaru's uncharacteristic attentiveness wasn't alarming enough, and Shikamaru being serious was a sign of something horribly wrong, Tsunade was pacing back and forth behind her desk, constantly biting her lip and cursing something or other. Naruto could hear enough swear words in there to make a prostitute blush. Hyôrinmaru rattled in his sheath, and that really put Naruto on edge. Hyôrinmaru had never been nervous or overly cautious enough to echo such a sentiment as this feeling of wrongness. If Hyôrinmaru was nervous, then there was definitely something wrong. Naruto shifted uneasily. As Tsunade continued to pace, Shikamaru looked over at Naruto and arched an eyebrow, as if to ask why he wasn't wearing his Chunin flak jacket. Naruto shrugged, his eyes following the female Hokage as she walked back and forth, still cursing up a storm. Naruto didn't like the Chunin flak jacket, so he chose not to wear it. That didn't make him any less of a Chunin, after all. Finally, the blonde woman stopped her pacing and sighed, leaning forward and laying her palms flat on her clean desk. Her face was dark and serious, and her amber eyes were as hard and sharp as tempered steel. When she spoke, it was quiet, but seemed to carry across the room quite easily. At precisely 700 hours this morning, we received word from Haruno Sakura about a certain situation. She turned her gaze to Naruto. It has come to our attention that, at approximately 0:45 hours last night, Uchiha Sasuke left Konoha. Naruto and Shikamaru's eyes widened as the blonde boy started, but, why would he? We don't know, Tsunade said calmly. Sakura-san was too hysterical to tell us anything else. She's at home right now crying into her pillow. As such, we are unsure if he left purely of his own free will, or if he was forced to leave. After all, it's very possible he was coerced into leaving. So you think he was threatened? Naruto asked, eyes narrowing. It's a possibility, she responded. Sasuke's not the nicest guy around, but I doubt he'd leave willingly, Shikamaru spoke up. He was probably threatened, and for someone to threaten Sasuke, they'd have to be pretty strong. The Chunin's eyes hardened. If Naruto and I are going on this mission, Hokage-sama, which I believe is the reason you summoned us here, then I'd like to request a team of Jonin to come with us. I can't honor that request, Tsunade replied. Right now, all of the Jonin are out on missions and won't be back for a while. Most Chunin are in similar situations. I'm sorry, but the only thing I can do is allow you to take whatever strong genin you might cross on the way out of the village. If you're lucky, you'll find 3 or 4 of them. Shikamaru sighed, turning towards the door. All right, we better get going, then. Come on, Naruto, let's go. Naruto, Tsunade called out. Naruto paused, looking back at her. There was a gleam in her eye that he couldn't recognize. In times of war, much like our current Cold War with the Sound, field promotions can occur if a ninja shows enough aptitude. Naruto's eyes widened as she smirked and shooed him out the door. The heavy oak creaked shut with a loud bang. This mission was going to be a difficult one, Naruto could feel it in his bones. Sasuke had left the night before, and if he was being forced, then there was no doubt that there were other ninja to worry about. Sasuke and those unconfirmed ninja had an 8-hour head start. To catch up with them and stay on their trail, he needed to have those who could endure the long run. He needed the elite of the genin. Naruto looked over the people he had chosen for the retrieval team, mentally listing his reasons for choosing them. In order to avoid casualties and fatalities, he needed to be sure about the people he was choosing for this mission. To rescue Sasuke, he couldn't afford to take anyone that wasn't ready for intense combat. Kiba was a certain necessity. As a member of the Inuzuka clan, his nose and sense of smell were unrivaled amongst the genin. Were they to come across more ninja than they could handle one-on-one, then Kiba and Akamaru's tag team method of fighting would prove invaluable. They needed Kiba's skills and senses in order to catch Sasuke and whatever ninja he was with. Neji would have been Naruto's first choice from the Hyuga, but the prodigy had been training with Hiashi and, thus, was in no condition to join the team. Naruto would have brought Hinata along either way, but as it stood, it seemed she would have to be their eyes for this mission. She had some pretty good skill with a sword, but Neji's eyes were still better than hers. Naruto would have liked to take Lee, and if not Lee then Choji, but Lee was still too weak from his surgery. It was likely that he wouldn't recover fully for another week or two, so Lee was definitely out. It was a shame, too. A taijutsu specialist would have been a most welcome addition. Choji was Naruto's alternative to Lee and Shikamaru had even recommended him, but it turned out that Choji was in the hospital for food poisoning. Shikamaru had been assigned the mission, so Naruto hadn't needed to ask for him to join them, but he would have if it had come to it. Shikamaru was an amazing strategist, one with far more skill and wit than most of the people Naruto knew. His strategic ability would play a big part in how well this mission went. The last person that had decided to join their crusade was the one that Naruto had expected the least, though it would perhaps be better to say he hadn't expected her to join at all. The team had run into Tenten on their way to the gates and she had been happy to join them. She was a bit too excited in Naruto's opinion. Be that as it may, Tenten would definitely be an asset on this mission. She had an unprecedented skill with weapons, especially those of the thrown kind. As a primarily long-range fighter, it was essential for her to be on the team, now that he thought about it. What if the enemy had a long-range fighter? That would have spelled their doom. Right, Naruto said, nodding to himself as they all looked at him and waited for his orders. You all know why you've been brought here. You all know what this mission is for and why we're on it. Sasuke ran away. We're going to bring him back. He pulled out a scroll and unfurled it, digging into his kunai pouch for the pen he knew was there, grasping it and clicking the point out. He drew a diagram. We'll form a single file line and line up in this manner. Kiba, you're first and you have point. You have the best nose in our group and know these forests better than any of us. It's also up to you to look for and warn us of traps and snares. Shikamaru, you're after Kiba. Behind Kiba and near the front of our group, you'll have one of the best viewpoints during our trek. You've also got your Kujimane no Jutsu, which will prove an invaluable asset. You're our thinker and our strategist, so it's up to you to come up with ideas for battle and such the like. I'm behind you, Shikamaru. I don't mean to brag much, but I'm easily our strongest man. If anything happens that overwhelms us and leaves us in a bad position, one that we can't escape from, I want all of you to retreat and wait till I tell you it's safe. I intend to return from this mission without any fatalities or serious casualties. Hinata will be after me and will be the group's eyes. With her enhanced vision, she can easily see things that the rest of us would miss. She's got my back, so any long-range or sniper attacks won't hit us or she can warn us before they do. Her eyes might not be as good as Neji's but they're essential to this squad. Beyond that, she's pretty good at medical stuff, too. Tenten is last and right behind Hinata. She's our sniper, our long-range fighter. She's the assassin of our group and will primarily focus on surprise attacks should we be able to execute them. Should any of our enemies be a long-range specialist, it will be your job to take them down. He clicked the top of the pen and its ball point retracted into it, leaving the tip blunt and hollow. Naruto showed all of them the diagram, then rolled it up and handed each of them a kunai. If we get separated, channel chakra into this kunai, throw it. It'll act as a homing beacon for me and make it easier for us to regroup. If you're fighting an enemy, only throw it if you can't win. Got it? Everyone nodded to him, a grim look on each of their faces. Naruto leaned back, rolling his shoulders, then straightened. Right then, the most important part is last. A couple of you don't actually know Sasuke, a few of you don't even like him. I'm not going to lie to you and say that we're on this mission to rescue a friend. We're not. All of the gathered ninja, save Shikamaru, looked at him in alarm, but Naruto continued, but Sasuke is a fellow shinobi of the Hidden Leaf Village, a comrade in arms, and we protect our own. Right now, he's headed for a very dangerous situation, one that few would ever come back from. It's our job to bring him home. Wow, Kiba grinned, chuckling, it looks like you do deserve that Chunin title. I may not like him that much, Shikamaru droned, shrugging lightly, but it's the Leaf Ninja way to take care of our own. Even I can't screw around on this one. We'll succeed, Naruto-kun, Tenten said, ignoring the slight look Hinata gave her. We can't lose. Hinata smiled at him and made a soft hum as she nodded her head, assuring him that they would all try their hardest. Sasuke would be brought home. They would make sure of it. Smiling in return, Naruto spun around to face the large forest standing tall in front of him. In a blur, all 5 members of the retrieval team leapt into the foliage. 3 hours passed quickly for Naruto and his team as Kiba led them constantly onward, chasing down the 4 sound shinobi who held Sasuke captive and carried him towards their village. Naruto was slowly becoming more and more anxious, though he hid the anxiety behind a mask of indifference. Orochimaru and his henchmen were not stupid enough to keep moving without setting traps. Kiba paused a moment, sniffing at the air with a tentative nose. The other 4 team members stopped as well, waiting for the Inuzuka's assessment. Earlier on in the chase, Kiba had told them that the enemy was traveling strictly by land, which no doubt meant that they were not used to traveling through trees. That presented the retrieval team with a speed advantage. If you traveled on the ground in a forest, you had to expend a great deal more energy in order to weave in and out of the trees, whereas those who jumped through the trees could move twice as fast as those on the ground. That also meant that the retrieval team would be far more fresh and energetic than the enemy when the inevitable battle occurred. There was a fight nearby, Kiba told them calmly, the usual loud brusque gone. Those sound ninja probably got into a skirmish with some leaf ninja who were on their way back from a mission. No one died. Other than that, I can't tell any details about what happened. We're going to ignore it, Naruto said firmly. The only other leaf ninja out on missions are Chunin and Jonin, so they can take care of themselves. We need keep going and rescue Sasuke. The longer we stall, the more shortcuts we take, that's all the more chance they have to cross the border into sound territory. We'll lose them if that happens. Naruto-kun's right, Tenten said. We don't need to involve ourselves with other teams. They're probably fine and our mission is still very important. We have to keep moving. Right, Kiba nodded, and the group was off again. As the retrieval team continued to chase their enemy, it soon became clear that the sound ninja were on guard from their previous skirmish. There were several instances when Hinata's Byakugan had barely caught them before they triggered a trap. Twice they had nearly fallen victim to a series of explosive notes set to trigger a perimeter mine. 3 times, they had barely stopped before getting caught in dangerous wire traps. Finally, however, as the sun reached its noon zenith, they had caught up with the enemy. Hinata's Byakugan caught sight of the 4 sound ninja as they rested, minimal traps set up around them to keep them safe or warn them of enemy presence. Sitting in the center of the group was a large, sealed barrel that couldn't be holding anything but Sasuke. As the retrieval team slowly crept closer, Naruto told them their roles in this confrontation. He would go first and take them by surprise while Hinata stabbed one through the spine with her sword. Tenten was to assassinate the gray-haired one while Shikamaru trapped the girl for information. Just as they were about to move, however, a cocky voice called out, well, look what we have here. A couple of insects caught in a spider's web. A web-like substance shot through the foliage, aimed to pin all 5 members to the tree they were crouched in. Naruto swore as the team broke apart, flinging his hand at the odd substance, Sokatsui. A thick ball of blue flames crashed into the sticky web, disintegrating it as it dried out and turned to dust. With a growl, Naruto forewent the plan and motioned for his team to attack outright. In a blur, all 5 members of the retrieval team leapt into the clearing, prepared to face off against the Sound 4. The 2 teams glared at one another, fire burning in each of their eyes with an intensity to match the sun or, in Naruto's case, an intensity to match the frozen sea. The enemy ninja all had something weird about them, Naruto decided. One had 2 heads, one had orange hair one had 6 arms, and the other had reddish-pink hair. Finally, the orange-haired one, who was doubtlessly the biggest and tallest person of the entire group, smirked and spoke to his team, you guys go ahead. I'll handle these little punks. Naruto smirked in return, reaching up and grasping Hyôrinmaru's azure hilt with his right hand. Do you really think you by yourself can beat me, let alone all 5 of us? All right, Jorubo, the gray-haired one said, you can have these guys. Make sure to catch up with us after you feed. The fat one, identified as Jorubo, merely nodded, slowly going through hand seals. Naruto scowled darkly and tightened his grip on the smooth cloth-covered wood grasped between his fingers. He started to pull it loose when Kiba interrupted him. Wait, Naruto, Kiba halted him, "You guys go on ahead. I'll take care of this big guy, okay." As Jorubo made to make another seal, Naruto's right hand shot out and grabbed his in mid-motion, stopping him cold. He turned to Kiba as Tenten, Shikamaru, and Hinata moved to follow the others, ignoring the squirming sound ninja he had a firm hold of. "All right, Kiba. He's all yours. But I expect you to catch up with us, got it?" "Hey," Kiba scoffed. "You give me too little credit, Naruto." Naruto smirked teasingly, then leapt after the rest of the retrieval team as they continued to follow the sound 4. As he reached the edge of the clearing, however, he paused and turned his head around to look at Kiba, the small smirk still present on his lips as he said, "That's Naruto Taicho to you, Kiba." "Jirobu's late," Sôten commented lightly, not really concerned with his teammates' unusually tardiness. It wasn't much to worry about unless he had been defeated by the team Konoha had sent to track them down. "We don't really have anything to worry about," Kidomaru said cockily. "Those genin Konoha sent to follow us don't really seem all that tough. They couldn't touch us during the invasion, what would make them able to defeat us now?" "Don't get too confident, you stupid bastard," Tayuya swore at him. "They obviously have some skill if the Leaf Village sent them after us. And did you forget, Orochimaru-sama put that blonde shit in the bingo books as rank A. But he's the only one we have to worry about, isn't he?" Kidomaru shot back, "The rest of them are weak-ass punks who couldn't hurt a fly. Together, it should be pretty easy to take them down. Besides, Jorubo was the weakest of us anyway." "Well, we don't need to worry anymore. He's here," Sôten said. Sure enough, Jirobu's heavy body landed at the far end of the clearing, unscathed and clearly victorious. Sôten scowled, "What took you so long?" Sorry, Jorubo said, scratching the back of his head sheepishly. "Those guys were stronger than I thought they'd be." "Damn fat ass," Tayuya muttered, then raised her voice. "Well, don't just stand there, you stupid bastard. Pick up the barrel." All right, Jorubo sighed, bending down to pick up the barrel. The other three ninja glanced at each other, throwing a suspicious glare at the large shinobi. Jorubo never failed to reprimand Tayuya on swearing, especially when it was directed at himself. Since Jorubo hadn't corrected her, that could only mean, "Hey, Jorubo," Sôten's oily voice called, "you're so obedient today." "What do you mean?" Jorubo asked confusedly. "I mean," Sôten replied, throwing a kunai at his supposed comrade. The large boy dodged out of the way, alarmed, "That you're not Jorubo." The large teen scowled, then shifted into the pony-tailed Chunin from the Konoha team, his eyes narrowed and his lips drawn into a tight frown. "So, you got me. Whatever shall I do?" "Reign over the frozen heavens," a voice called as the sky darkened, black clouds blocking out the sun. Hyôrinmaru, a fierce dragon of water, easily 3 times the size of a normal Suiryuden, rushed through the trees, passing just over top of Shikamaru's head and aiming for the 3-sound ninja. Cursing, the 3 of them leapt out of its path, but Kidomaru wasn't quite fast enough to escape the torrent of water as the beast splashed off of the ground. It soaked into his shirt and 4 of his arms, instantly freezing and weighing him down. He barely managed to right himself and land on his feet, swaying as the ice threatened to pull him to the ground. Naruto walked out of the trees, the rest of the team following behind him. Cursing their luck, Sôten and Tayuya grabbed the barrel and raced off into the foliage, leaving a slightly uneasy Kidomaru to fight off the rest of the retrieval team. Kidomaru smirked, flashing through hand seals, "That's alright. I can take down all 4 of you with only 2 arms." Naruto made a move to take him on, but a hand on his shoulder stopped him. Tenten smiled, jerking her head towards the trees. Naruto nodded, and was about to leave again when Tenten pulled on his arm, spinning him around until he was facing her. Surprised, Naruto could do nothing as Tenten leaned forward and kissed him. Her lips were warm and soft, but had a certain edge to them that Hinata's did not. If he had to describe the difference between kissing the 2 girls, he would describe it as 2 different worlds. Hinata's kisses were soft and tender and held all the regality and passion of a princess who loved a prince. Tenten's kiss was more possessive and passionate, like a tigress claiming her mate. Then, to Naruto's slight disappointment, it was over and Tenten leaned back, flustered and blushing. Naruto's cheeks burned as well and he could see something sparkle in Tenten's eyes, something that he had only seen in Hinata's eyes before. He opened his mouth to talk, but she shook her head and whispered, "Go." Confused, but suddenly feeling much calmer and more confident than before, he turned and followed Hinata and Shikamaru into the trees. He would talk to her later and determine what had happened in that moment. For the time being, he had a job to do, a mission to complete, and nothing was going to stop him from completing it. Tenten allowed a small smile to grace her lips. At least, if she died in this fight, she had gotten a kiss out of him. Even if she could never have anything more than that single kiss, that one action would leave her content for as long as she let it. She squared her shoulders and drew a kunai, then turned to face her opponent. "Come on, now, little kunoichi," the dark-skinned, six-armed shinobi taunted, "let's play a little game." She scowled at him and tightened her grip on her kunai. Naruto was counting on her to defeat this freaky boy, and to do so without dying. Even if he hadn't directly said so, she knew that it was so. He was the kind of person who cared about everyone except his enemies. She smiled sadly. That was one of the things she loved about him, one of the reasons she wished she were in Hinata's shoes. For now, though, she could settle for being a reliable comrade. She would defeat this bastard. Heh, Kyurinmaru laughed, going through hand seals. You won't last 3 minutes. Even if she died, she wouldn't lose. Huff, Sôten panted as he looked back, glaring at his enemies. The Leaf Ninja team was shrinking as more and more of its members stayed behind to fight, but so was his own team. Things looked grim. At the rate things were progressing, the Konoha team would outlast them. He swore loudly. Damn. He landed solidly on a tree branch, his movements halting as he tossed a large, cylindrical coffin towards Tayuya, who caught it deftly and with ease. He tensed as he turned around, shouting to the girl behind him, "Take the target to Orochimaru-sama. I'm going to put a stop to this nonsense once and for all." Tayuya nodded obediently. "Don't die, you stupid bastard." Wordlessly, she leapt onward, the large barrel containing Uchiha Sasuke tucked safely in her arms. She might not like Sôten and the rest of their team, but even she wasn't a fool. If the rest of the team died, she'd be all alone against some odds that she rather didn't like. Even one of the elite Sound 4 didn't stand a chance 5-on-1. The pony-tailed Chunin wasn't that big of a concern for her. He looked to be the softest of the group, more the brainy type than the muscle of the team. He was pretty smart, but she could probably annihilate him if she went all out. He seemed more like the strategist than the combat specialist. Luckily for her, she could do both. It was the blonde boy that worried her, not anyone else. Even if it only lasted a second or two, he had managed to tear a hole in their barrier during the Chunin Exams the month or so previous. Not only that, but he was rated in the Otogakur Bingo books as a Rankin ninja nearly on par with the legendary Hatake Kakashi. And Orochimaru had been the one to put him there. Kimimaro was probably the only one besides Kabuto and Orochimaru himself who could match up against the blonde and have any chance of victory. They were simply the only people in Otogakur who had the skills and power to fight that monstrous little kid, and even Kimimaro and Kabuto still didn't have a sure victory. She shivered. After all, when that dragon had been called on earlier, it had been so powerful that it even affected the weather. Something with that degree of elemental control was obviously far stronger than any jutsu she could use. She had just barely escaped from it the first time. There wasn't a guarantee she'd escape a second time. She glanced back and then redoubled her pace, her legs screaming in agony as she forced them to keep working. Behind her were Naruto and Shikamaru, following at a pace that would easily outlast her own. If she didn't get a move on, if she didn't either cross the border or run into some form of help, she was dead. Left to fight the second girl on the team, Sôten grimaced as the two remaining boys sped past him, knowing that he wouldn't be able to stop them. He only hoped that, should this girl prove to be his better, she would end his life quickly and painlessly and not cripple him or leave him alive. Orochimaru would kill them if they returned empty-handed. Considering how obsessed Orochimaru was with the Uchiha boy, failure was not an option. He needed to either defeat the girl that stood there and glared at him defiantly or die in the attempt, hopefully swiftly and painlessly. He was hoping for the latter, though he would fight his hardest, because he knew that the blonde powerhouse harbored some feelings for her. And Orochimaru wouldn't tolerate the continued living of the Sound 4 if they failed this mission. He'd kill all 4 of them, that's precisely what he'd do. He wouldn't kill them quickly, either. He would drag it out for as long as he could, watch as they squirmed and begged for release, then have Kabuto heal them up again only to torture them to death's door once more. That was the Snake Sennin style. If you were such a failure and at the same time extremely lucky, then he'd kill you on the spot. Well, Sôten drawled calmly, a smirk curling on his lips. He would fight to the end. Let's get this show on the road, eh? Hinata merely drew her sword, brandishing it in front of her body as she called out, Hajike, Tobiame. Tenten panted, her back pressed up against the large trunk of a tall, thick tree as she waited for her opponent to make his next move. Her chest heaved and her breasts bounced as she sucked in air as if it were becoming scarce, her eyes flickering around her. Somehow, he had managed to break free of the ice that had encircled his arms and was currently using his limb advantage effectively. She had tried to take him out quickly in the beginning so that she could go on and help the others, but her efforts had been for naught. Shortly after freeing himself of the ice, Hyôrinmaru had disappeared into the foliage and started using sniper tactics to try to kill her. He too had been mostly unsuccessful and she only had a few scratches. Heh, you're better than I gave you credit for, Hyôrinmaru chuckled darkly, his voice echoing over the small clearing Tenten stood in. You've lasted 10 minutes 52 seconds so far and, despite my best efforts, are, for the most part, unwounded. There was a metallic ping as Tenten deflected a few of the 6-armed ninja's custom kunai knives with some of her own shuriken. The 4 shuriken became embedded in several trees, while the 5 golden kunai sank into the ground with a soft thump, rendered useless by the girl's skill. That was how the majority of the battle had been going. Every time Hyôrinmaru threw kunai at her, she would deflect it with one of her own weapons. Every time Hyôrinmaru shot his strange webbing at her, she would slice it to bits with her skillful weapons throws. Since her back was to such a thick and ancient tree, the majority of his attacks were within her range of sight. Neither of them could get an attack in on the other and neither could make any dangerous or deadly, or even debilitating, blows on their opponent. In fact, were it not for how tired Tenten was and how much energy she had to expend to defend herself, the battle would be an obvious and indecisive stalemate. If she were to be blunt with herself, though, Tenten knew she had no hope of winning. Her enemy was a highly skilled ninja with far more field experience than her and a great deal more stamina. She couldn't even tell where her opponent was and yet he could see her clearly enough to aim with deadly accuracy. I need help, Tenten whispered, not really expecting someone to answer. Please, I need help. Foolish little girl, a voice answered her, strong and feminine, you have needed help for far too long, yet you wait till now to admit it. In an instant, the forest around Tenten melted away into a beautiful blue sky with the sun shining on her neck and a delicate breeze wafting against her skin, warm and soothing on her cuts and gashes. She felt a smile curl her lips and let out a soft sigh, relaxing in the gentle atmosphere around her. Until she looked down, that is, and found that she was standing not on land and grass, or even sand, but on a cloud that hovered over a giant ocean that stretched as far as she could see. She let out a terrified shriek and waited to fall plummeting into the icy water below her, but nothing happened. She was still standing on the cloud. Did you really think you would fall in this place? The voice from before asked. Tenten whirled around, coming face to face with a black, serpentine dragon with vibrant pink eyes. The dragon swirled around her, coiling its large body around Tenten's own body and leaning back once it was eye level with her. You are in command of this place. It is shaped purely by your soul, and so long as your soul is stable, you can stand on the clouds and fly through the air. Who? Tenten stammered nervously, her voice quiet. Who are you? I am your fighting spirit given physical form, the dragon said, talking even though its lips and mouth remained motionless. I am your power, your unique ability, and I shall always be a part of you, no matter what. I am Sunga, the dragon of the wind, and I am at your service. Whatever you desire, I shall do my best to grant it. How? Tenten started, unsure to ask her question. How do I? As long as you can hear my name, you shall know, Sunga answered cryptically. Now, it is time to die, Hyôrinmaru's voice called loudly, snapping Tenten's eyes open, who wasn't even aware that she'd closed them. With a diagonal flick of her wrist, Tenten swung the sword gripped in her right hand, words tumbling out of her mouth that she would never forget. Ama ni Jashoshiro, Sunga. Ascend into heaven, Frost Cloud Fang. A thick blade of wind, nearly a third as tall as the trees around her, leapt from the arc her swing had made at an amazing speed and sliced clean through Hyôrinmaru's arrow, then through the trees in front of her, and, finally, based on the agonized cry she heard, it cut through Hyôrinmaru as well. Letting out a sigh of relief, Tenten grinned and looked down at her new sword. The curve of the katana was delicate and majestic and the polished steel was clean and firm. The hand guard was a simple circle made of pure gold and the hilt was simple black wood with 3 flat golden studs to hold the blade in place and no cloth. At the bottom, where the cap would normally be, was a 3-toed dragon's claw that held a beautiful amethyst gem. Tenten's grin widened into a smile. Beautiful, Sunga. In a blur, Tenten leapt off towards her friends. Naruto's lips curled into a frown as he walked over the smooth but hard stone beneath his feet, his blue eyes bright with determination and excitement. He recognized the scenery from a history book he had read once about the Hokage, from the Shodai all the way to the Yondaime. This was the Valley of the End, where the Shodai Hokage had battled and beaten Uchiha Madara. For a moment, Naruto worried about the comrades he had left behind on this mission just so he could get this far. He hoped that all of them made it out of this tragedy alive, especially Lee, who was fighting Kimimaro, and Shikamaru, who was taking on Tayuya. He wasn't too worried about Hinata and Tenten. They could take care of themselves well enough to survive their opponents. Naruto looked up and thought, for a moment, about the irony of the situation. They were at the Valley of the End, where a Hokage had fought an Uchiha. Now, he stood atop the Shodai's head and was the son of a Hokage, and Sasuke stood atop Madara's head and was a scion of the mighty Uchiha clan. He had to fight down a hollow laugh at how ironic that seemed. Taking a few more steps forward, Naruto gathered air into his lungs and yelled, "Sasuke!" Sasuke didn't move for a moment, then slowly turned around, locking his cool, coal-black eyes onto Naruto's dark-clad form. His gaze was dispassionate, and held none of the usual fire that made him Naruto's rival, Naruto. Sasuke turned back around. "Go back home, Naruto. I'm not leaving this place without you, Sasuke," Naruto said coldly, determination in his voice. "You're coming back even if I have to drag you there myself." "I'm leaving," Sasuke said firmly, his tone icy. "I'm leaving to get more power. Power enough to force the truth from Itachi. Power enough that he doesn't have to lie anymore." "Lies, Itachi?" Naruto asked confusedly. "Sasuke, did he?" "No," Sasuke shouted angrily, eyes bleeding into red. "I don't care what he told you. It's all lies. There's no way the Uchiha clan would do something like that. No way my father would do something so horrible. No way." His voice softened and he suddenly sounded like a scared child. "No way my mother could do something like that." He flung a kunai at Naruto, shouting, "The Uchiha clan was honorable. There's no possible reason why they would plan to revolt. I've had enough of Itachi's lies." Naruto deflected the kunai with his sword, his lips curling into a scowl as he leapt onto the edge of the waterfall, dashing across it and towards Sasuke, knowing that he could not reason with his friend. Sasuke leapt off Madara's statue, mirroring Naruto's movements as he drew his own blade from its sheath. They clashed at the dead center of the waterfall, sparks flying off their swords and the blades wobbling and twitching as the two of them fought for dominance. Sasuke's ninjutsu was shorter than Naruto's katana, but its size didn't make it any weaker. It held its ground against the larger sword and didn't bend or chip. Sasuke smirked, eyes glinting dangerously. "You know, Naruto, we never did get to have our match." Naruto's eyes widened, then an excited grin crept over his lips as he said, "You're right." His grin widened as he brought his left hand up and started doing hand seals, repeating Haku's words, "But now I have 2 advantages." Sasuke's eyes went wide as Naruto continued, "The first is that I've occupied your hand, thus preventing you from using jutsu. The second is the water around us," Sasuke finished, looking around himself as needles of water formed a small cage around him. He swore loudly, already thinking of his escape. "Sensatsu Susho," Naruto cried, the needles converging on the spot Sasuke had occupied a moment before. Naruto allowed his grin to widen as Sasuke landed lightly a few meters away, standing atop the water. Naruto could make out the shadow of a grin on his face and couldn't help the excitement that flooded him. Naruto dashed forward, already flipping through more hand seals as Sasuke backed up, doing seals of his own. The water around him churned as Sasuke took a deep breath, his mouth shut tightly. Simultaneously, they unleashed the full power of their attacks. Naruto called out, "Suiten, Suiryuden no Jutsu." A dragon of water twisted its way out of the river, swirling and twisting as its form continued to solidify into a giant beast made completely of the abundant liquid. It bared fangs made of water as its unnatural yellow eyes glowed amongst the blue. With a silent but monstrous roar, it gushed forth. "Kaden! Karyuenden no Jutsu. As his lungs burned and the chakra within them quickly became fire, Sasuke put his fingers to his lips and blew out as hard as he could. A mass of fire leapt from past his lips, scorching the air in front of him as it rushed forward, engulfing the air in the smell of flames. It sizzled as it collided with Naruto's giant beast of water, turning the great dragon into steam as the water put out the rest of the flame. Sasuke felt a grin tug at his lips and couldn't help but notice just how much fun it was to have such a challenge as the boy in front of him. No one had pushed him to his limits in such a way before, not even Itachi. Now, after knowing that they stood on nearly equal ground for almost 2 months, they would truly see which of them was better. Naruto was in front of Sasuke again, swinging his sword down with one hand. Sasuke matched his attack with a horizontal slash at eye level, drawing their blades into another inverted tug-o-war. Both swords jiggled as they each tried to get the upper hand, to beat their opponent in a contest of brute strength. Pulling away, both struck a second time, Naruto upwards diagonally and Sasuke diagonally downwards. Another direct clash occurred, but both knew by now that neither outclassed the other in pure strength, so they pulled away again, then swung in the direction opposite of their previous strike. They clashed several more times, each blow more thunderous and quicker than the last, before they both admitted that their skill with a blade was about equal. That automatically meant they were about equal in speed, but neither would accept that as the truth without direct proof. Naruto thought he had the upper hand in speed. He disappeared with almost no noise and reappeared behind Sasuke, sword poised to strike. From behind, he missed the small smirk on Sasuke's face before the Uchiha vanished as well, solidifying once more behind Naruto, his sword in mid-stab. Twisting around, Naruto held Hyôrinmaru above his head until it was parallel with his ears, watching Sasuke's sword grind against the blade. Naruto arched an eyebrow, Shunpo. Sasuke's eyebrow arched as well, could it be anything else? Jumping back from one another, Sasuke went through a familiar set of hand seals while Naruto prepared his defense. As Sasuke called out the name of his offensive technique, a skill that Naruto not only knew but had in his own arsenal, Naruto called out the name of his defensive jutsu. Kaden. Gukaku no Jutsu. Sasuke inhaled sharply, the air in his lungs converting itself into fire chakra, then put his fingers to his lips and blew out as hard as he could. A large ball of fire, easily 3 times as big as the one he had used on Kakashi months ago during the bell test, barreled forward toward the seemingly defenseless blonde. Sasuke knew better. Sôten. Tsunade. A large, 3-meter-tall wall of thick water rose up, encircling Naruto from all around. As the fireball slowly sputtered and died against his unnecessarily strong defense, Naruto was already going through more hand seals and planning an offensive move Itachi had taught him during the return trip from Yuki no Kuni. As the wall of water collapsed, Naruto called out the name of his attack, Sôten, Suigaden no Jutsu. 4. Drill-like fangs of water launched themselves at Sasuke from all sides, quickly closing in on him. 4 shuriken leapt to him from Naruto's hands. Sasuke scoffed as he realized that he only had one option if he wanted to prevent Naruto from driving him into a corner. With a flick of his wrist, the 4 water fangs evaporated into steam and the shuriken fell into the river as melted slag. Sasuke held his flaming blade up, smirking, "How about we up the ante?" Naruto grinned, "Thought you'd never ask." Jumping backward, Naruto swung his sword and called out its name, Hyôrinmaru. A giant dragon bigger than any Sasuke had ever seen from any technique launched itself towards him, intent on pushing him down beneath the water. Sasuke leapt out of the way, watching as it crashed into the water and rumbled the cliff with its force. Then, seconds later, the water began to freeze all along the river until only a small space in front of the Shidai's statue remained liquid. Sasuke chuckled darkly, then threw his head back and laughed. This was a challenge, even his could not match that raw power with just his sword and his will. Orochimaru may have been able to, but he was far above Sasuke's level. And if Sasuke couldn't defeat Naruto under his own power, he just needed to use someone else's. He dropped his guard and watched the look of disgust cross Naruto's face as the cursed mark flooded him with power, drawing small black blemishes across his pale skin. He knew, though, that even level 1 would not be a match for Naruto. No, he needed much more power. Soon, he could feel the might of level 2 tingle over his skin. There was a ripping sound as Sasuke's shirt tore and 2 misshapen wings sprouted from his back. His skin became dark and a black cross stretched over his nose like an ugly scar. His sclera turned black but his Sharingan remained its malevolent red. Finally, his hair lengthened to match the statue beneath his feet and became bleach white. He brandished his flaming sword, an excited grin on his face. Naruto only seemed disappointed, not at his power or his strength, but at Sasuke himself, as though the Uchiha had lowered himself to a level Naruto had thought him above. Then, Naruto said that one word, the one word that Sasuke had forgotten all about, Bankai. The transformation occurred just as Sasuke remembered it would, the wings, the tail, the gauntlets, the greaves, even the flowers and the sky darkening. Whatever part of the river had remained unfrozen was now frozen, and even the Shaddai's statue was blanketed in the never-ending plain of ice. The attack came before he could catch it, at speeds he could only dream of at his current level, and then he barely managed to raise his sword in time. Naruto's eyes were frigid, colder than Sasuke had ever seen them, and he suddenly understood why Naruto had been promoted and apprenticed to Jiraiya for a while. The kick was even faster and knocked Sasuke right into Madara's statue, breaking the thick layer of ice that had crept over it. Even with the level 2 cursed mark, Sasuke felt weak and powerless. There was a heavy pressure in the air, one that he'd never felt before, and it made it hard for him to breathe. Slowly, like an infant crawling desperately towards his parents during a thunderstorm, Sasuke stood again. It felt like ages had passed instead of a few short minutes, and he stumbled once or twice before flapping his awkward wings and flying until he was level with Naruto. The blonde seemed unsurprised and merely raised his sword. Sasuke brandished his sword as well, trying to recompose himself and lose after having fought his hardest. He waited for his blonde opponent to rush him, but the boy merely stood there, floating in midair, his sword pointing towards Sasuke. Finally, however, he spoke, but his words were of no comfort to the Uchiha, Senenhiro. Before he could do anything, several pillars of ice rose up around him like a cage, trapping him within their grasp. Looking up, Sasuke knew he'd never make it in time to escape from his opponent's attack and accepted his defeat. He sheathed his sword and bowed his head, then waited for the inevitable. As soon as Naruto twisted his sword, the pillars rushed in and converged upon Sasuke, trapping him in an inescapable cage of unnatural ice. There were no screams, no sounds of pain, and no feel of death. The blonde slowly hovered forward, raised his sword, then slashed into the thick cage. It shattered into thousands of tiny pieces as Sasuke was thrown backwards, his skin its normal pale color and his sclera their normal white. He cried out in pain as he collided with the rock of Madara's feet, hitting so hard that the cliff caved slightly and conformed to his body, holding him to the rock wall firmly. Naruto gently floated down, his icy additions evaporating as he slowly landed on the water, walking across it as though it were dry land. Sasuke's heaving breaths were heavy and pain-filled, but Naruto couldn't figure out why. He hadn't hit Sasuke that hard, had he? It hadn't been his intention to wound Sasuke, merely defeat him with an overwhelming display of power. As Naruto drew closer, however, there was a flash of light behind him and he spun around gripping his sword and scowling. He kept his surprise in check as a pair of shoji doors opened in midair, only to reveal another pair of similar doors that opened as well, revealing a traditional Japanese dwelling. A black butterfly fluttered out, followed by a tall old man who was hunched over, had a head that was shaved bald and covered with scars, and a beard that reached his knees and was bound by black cord. The old man opened his eyes and Naruto suddenly found it impossible to stand and very difficult to breathe. He gasped as he fell to his knees, shivering and clutching at his throat and chest. He felt terror unlike any he had ever imagined, as if there was a god holding a knife to his throat, poised to slit it at any second. There were two deep growls that Naruto heard, one that he recognized as Hyorinmaru, who he could also tell was coiled around him protectively and snarling at the old man, and one that could only be the Fawkes. Despite their efforts, however, Naruto could not shake off the elderly man's dark intent. Yamamoto-sama, Sasuke's voice gasped, and the old man's eyes left Naruto. He could breathe again as the aged warrior turned his gaze to Sasuke. Slowly, deliberately, the man identified as Yamamoto walked toward Sasuke, his eyes stern and harsh. Still, Sasuke didn't seem to be suffering as Naruto had, so the blonde boy figured that Yamamoto's stern glare was nothing more than that. After a moment, he spoke up, "When you called out to me asking for help, for a way to clinch victory and ascend to greatness with justice as your cause, I answered your plea." Sasuke seemed to know where this was going, Yamamoto-sama. I gave you the power you sought, let you borrow my power, until you were strong enough to awaken your own, Yamamoto continued, his voice calm but still just as stern. The time has come for you to search within yourself and find your true power, just as your friend over there found his, and Yamamoto reached down and pulled Sasuke's sword from its sheath. Naruto watched with wide eyes as the ninja slowly morphed into a full-length katana with a black scabbard. A brown substance wrapped over it, transforming into a gnarled cane. Yamamoto continued, it is time I reclaimed my own sword. Without another word, Yamamoto turned around and slowly walked back toward the gateway made of shoji doors. He paused, and turned back to Naruto, your father, boy, he would be very proud of you. Naruto's eyes widened for a second, then he glanced at Sasuke for a second, but, why? Yamamoto had turned back towards the doors and, besides the fact that he hadn't walked into them yet, there seemed to be no indication that he would answer the blonde. Finally, after a long pause and a thick silence, he said quietly, it was such a small seed, I wanted to see it grow. Then, in a flash of light, Yamamoto disappeared from the world and Sasuke suddenly sobbed. Alarmed, Naruto turned around and walked toward the Uchiha, who pounded his fist against the thick rock. Naruto asked, what's wrong? I've been such a fool. Sasuke suddenly cried, tears pouring down his cheeks. He was crying, that night, he ignored that in favor of my own hatred. He was crying because he had to choose between the clan and the village. Sasuke sobbed again, and he chose the village. The unspoken, just like I should've, hung in the air, but Naruto didn't voice it and neither did Sasuke. Lifting his head, tears streaming down his cheeks, Sasuke's next words were nearly begging, please, Naruto, take me home. Smiling sadly, Naruto hefted Sasuke onto his shoulders and steadily walked over to the bank of the small lake. He almost slipped and fell in a few times, after all, walking on water with someone slung over your shoulders isn't the same as doing it on land. As soon as Naruto's foot touched dry earth, the sky opened up, and down came the rain. Naruto gently closed the door behind him, unaware that it didn't shut fully, as it should have. His hair was soaked and clung to his head and the sides of his face, but still managed to stay messy and untamed. His clothes were dry, merely because Tsunade had forbidden him to come into her office with wet clothes. Sasuke was resting in the hospital, asleep and no doubt recovering from the whole ordeal. There was a group of Anbu, a full squad if he remembered correctly, guarding him to prevent another catastrophe from happening. Jiraiya was supposed to seal up the cursed mark as soon as he got back in. For the most part, the retrieval team had returned without any significant injury. Kiba had come in with a few broken bones and Shikamaru had walked in with a broken finger, but other than that, the worst injuries were minor scratches. The thing that had thrown Naruto for a loop was the enemy they had managed to capture. According to what he had been told, Tenten, Lee, and Gaara, who had greeted Naruto and was given a warm hug in return, had fought and defeated Kimimaro. Somehow, they had also managed to bring him back alive, though he was quickly dying. After some major elective surgery, he had been cured and was recovering in a hospital bed. Anbu were on constant watch with him, too. Aside from that, the mission had gone pretty much as it was supposed to. Sasuke had been brought back, the enemy ninja who had kidnapped him or threatened him, namely, Saken, Uken, Tayuya, Kidomaru, and Jorubo, were dead, and everyone had come back alive and mostly unharmed. It had been marked down as a success in their records. One of the biggest surprises Naruto had gotten on the mission, beyond meeting Yamamoto and the events therein, was meeting Kakashi on the way back home. His sensei had been relieved to find that he and Sasuke were fine and mostly unharmed, though he was slightly wary of the empty sheath on Sasuke's back. Kakashi had asked some uncomfortable question, such as how Naruto had found out about his heritage and whether or not it was true. Naruto had been put on the spot and could do nothing more or less than tell the truth, the entire truth, to Kakashi. That made Kakashi, Jiraiya, Tsunade, Naruto, and Sasuke as the only people who knew what Itachi had done. Itachi, surprisingly, had met them at the gates and told them the good news about the rest of the team. Kiba was the most severely injured of the entire group, and all he had was a broken right arm, a dislocated shoulder, and a few fractures in his left hand. Shikamaru was the next worse of with a single broken finger and a bruised ego. Naruto had, of course, joked about how Shikamaru always had to fight girls. Naruto had barely stepped foot outside the hospital, though, when, like a predator pouncing on his prey, an Anbu had informed him that Tsunade wanted his oral report immediately. When Naruto had huffed and complained about the abruptness of the demand, the Anbu had cryptically said that the report wasn't the only reason Naruto was being summoned. And, as he walked into the Hokage's office, he knew that the Anbu hadn't been lying. Tsunade never had that look on her face unless she was dealing with something really serious and would rather not have to. He saluted her, grinning cheekily as she waved his gesture off with a sigh and a flick of her wrist. He stood at ease and waited for her to start. "Before you give me your report," Tsunade said, sounding grave. The door squeaked but neither paid it any attention. "I have something I need to discuss with you." Naruto did not like the tone, even though she continued, "You are aware, aren't you, that matters of family fall primarily into the council's hands and not the Hokage, right? That they can make decisions about clan matters that do not infringe upon that clan's basic rights." "Yes, I'm aware," Naruto said hesitantly. "Ji-san made sure I knew about that stuff so that they and everybody else couldn't take advantage of me and my ignorance." "Why?" "Well," Tsunade sighed again, "the council, in its infinite wisdom, has decided that the Namikaze clan would take too long to rebuild." Somehow, Naruto knew that the Namikaze clan hadn't been very big to begin with, if they followed the usual laws of monogamous marriage. Oh, Naruto really didn't like where this conversation was going. Apparently, Tsunade could tell, so she reassured him, "It's all your choice, however, and you don't have to choose now, but they would like to know by the time you turn 16. Anyway, they've ruled that you can have up to 4 wives of your choosing. Sasuke and Itachi are in similar boats, and can marry up to 3. Knees weak, Naruto fell back into the chair sitting behind him, the thud of his weight on the cushions blocking out the gasps of surprise from behind the door. Up to 4 wives, and it was all his choice. A small, rational part of Naruto knew that not only was this most men's dream, it was also something Jiraiya would kill for. But him, multiple wives, never. He would never marry anyone but Hinata, and there was no reason why he would even consider marrying 2 or 3 other women as well. There wasn't a single thing that would change his mind. He wouldn't answer yes to the proposal no matter what. Unless they all loved him for who he was. But could he really do that to Hinata? Force her to share when any other man would never have to ask that of her? He wanted a family. In fact, he desperately desired to have a large family that he could love and cherish for the rest of his life. If he married more than one girl, he could have that. But would he really force Hinata to share? No, he wouldn't ask her to share, at least not directly. He wouldn't even think of forcing her to share, either. He'd talk to her, ask her what she thought of this decision the council had made, and, depending on her response, that's what his answer would be. Hinata was his partner just as much as she was the love of his life. If it didn't bother her, he might say yes to this proposal. "Listen, Naruto," Tsunade said quietly, "I know this is a big bombshell to drop on you, but I don't have enough control of civilian affairs, and marriage falls under that category, to reject it. It's all your choice, even if the council is doing this for its own greedy purposes." "But," Naruto started, "why, you have techniques that no one else knows how to do," she said, and Naruto instantly understood what she meant, Hado and his other Kido. The council wants to ensure that the usage of those techniques becomes widespread enough in their lifetimes. The only way to do that is for me to marry multiple women and father many children, Naruto finished softly. Tsunade sighed, "This is a lot to take in, I know. Go home and rest. You can give your report in a few days." Standing, Naruto bowed, "Hi." Then, he disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Outside the door, as Tsunade opened up her drawer and pulled out a bottle of sake, Hinata and Tenten turned to look at one another, mentally going over what they had learned. Since they hadn't seen Naruto once he had gotten back in, they had decided to see if Tsunade knew where he was. Fortunately for them, they had not been fast enough to catch Tsunade before Naruto. That had allowed them to eavesdrop. "Would you really?" The rest of Tenten's question was silent, but it was obvious enough that Hinata knew what she was talking about. Hi, Hinata said, embarrassing images going through her head, "but only if you truly love Naruto-kun." "How did you?" Tenten's mouth refused to make another sound as she gaped openly at the girl next to her. "Anyo, your kiss," Hinata murmured quietly. "I saw you kiss Naruto-kun earlier. Do you really love him?" I don't know," Tenten replied softly. I think I do. But, I'm not positive. Besides, marriage, I want to get to know him a bit more before I think about that. Hinata smiled. Remember, you only have until Naruto-kun's 16th birthday to decide. I think I can make up my mind by then, Tenten retorted humorously. So, we're in agreement then? Hinata nodded. We can share, and if one of us hurts Naruto-kun, the other can harass. Tenten smiled, slightly surprised at timid little Hinata's wordage, though she wasn't quite so timid or little anymore, then held out her hand, agreed. We can share, but only because we both love Naruto-kun. It'll be our job to give him what he's wanted above all else. Hinata seemed shocked that Tenten knew Naruto's deepest desire, but grasped the other girl's hand, smiling warmly, a loving home, more affection than he's ever thought possible, and a big, loving family, with plenty of children for him to spoil. Tenten suddenly pulled the Hyuga into a huge, and the younger girl was surprised to find wet tears soaking into her shirt as the older girl whispered into her ear, "Thank you, Hinata. Thank you for giving me a chance." In that moment, Hinata knew she had made the right decision. She and Tenten most certainly would not agree about everything in the coming days, but their friendship and their love for Naruto would hopefully make things much easier to weather. Hopefully. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. The next part will be out soon.